If people could please take their seats, we're going to get started with tonight's meeting. So we're going to go ahead and get started. And Bobby, I see you here. Could you lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance tonight? Come on forward. You can do it from there. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Yvonne, can we have a roll call, please?
Yes. Councilmember D'Amico?
Yes.
Councilmember Horvath?
Here.
Councilmember Meister?
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Duran is out this evening, and Mayor Heilman.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Thank you. Mayor Pro Tem Duran lost his mother this last week. We will be adjourning in her memory, but in light of his family responsibilities, he is not able to be with us tonight. We'll now turn to the approval of the agenda. Yvonne, any requested changes by staff? And I know that the Mayor Pro Tem also requested that we hold several items. So any changes by staff?
Yes, with regard to item 2J, staff informed me that there was a typo on the birth date listed for one of the recipients. So the typo will be corrected before the final approved staff report is scanned into our repository.
Okay. If there's no objection, then we'll go ahead and make that correction.
And Mayor Pro Tem Duran requested that the following items be tabled to the next meeting so that he can participate in the discussion. And those would be item 4D, reconvening the Ethics Reform Task Force. Item 5A, the Comprehensive Lobbyist Services Plan. And item 5C, his appointment to the Senior Advisory Board.
Okay. Any objection to holding those over until he returns? Okay, so those will be tabled until our next meeting. Other changes by council?
If I may, Mayor, I'd like to offer items 6A, 5B, and 4D to add to consent.
Okay, let's do those one at a time. 4A?
4D.
4D, I'm sorry. 4D has been tabled.
Okay. 5B.
5B.
That's the Russian arts.
Yes, any objection to moving that to consent?
No.
Without objection, it'll
And 6A.
and 6A. 6A is an ordinance change that's mandated by state law, correct?
Correct. Yes. EV charging.
Any objection? Then those items will be moved to consent. Any other changes? Hearing none, I'd entertain a motion to approve.
So moved.
Been moved and seconded. All those in favor, please push your button. We're waiting for one. Oh, hold on a second.
Okay.
We may have spoken too soon.
Yes. Since none of my colleagues are interested in moving item 4B or 4C, I guess 4C is a public safety update. We want to talk about that. But 4B, the Smart City Safety Pilot Project.
I actually had a couple of quick questions on that.
Okay, all right, then I'll vote yes.
But
and get it
maybe
over
we
with.
can do 4B and 4C together because they are related.
Perfect.
Okay? All right. So we'll combine 4B and 4C for purposes of staff, and we can now go ahead and vote, and we all have voted. We have an agenda. The agenda stands as it's amended. We'll now turn to adjournment motions. Are there adjournment motions? Yeah. Lauren?
Thank you. I'd like to adjourn in memory of Graciela Rodriguez. Graciela Rodriguez is the mother of Resident and Public Facilities Commissioner Manny Rodriguez. She passed on March 11th. She was 87. Manny describes Graciela as a wonderful person and a kind and caring soul. In 1965, they fled Cuba together. She was 35 years old and Manny was 5. In a new country, she had to start her life all over again. With love and determination, she managed to raise a child all by herself, and a few years later was able to reunite them with her mother, Manny's grandmother. In the early days, Graciela worked several jobs and took English classes. She soon began working at Merrill Lynch and retired after a 25-year career with the company. For the last 17 years, Graciela battled Alzheimer's disease with courage and dignity. Graciela's beautiful spirit will live on. May she rest in peace. Thank you.
Lindsay?
Thank you, Mayor. I'd also like to adjourn in memory of Sandra Mae Doyle Torres, also known as Sandy. Sandy was the mother of Rachel Torres, who has done tremendous work here in our community for Unite Here Local 11. Her lifelong activism continues in Rachel, who is very present in our community, so I'd like to adjourn in memory of Ms. Torres. And as is our tradition here in the city of West Hollywood, to adjourn in memory of those killed in service to our country since our last meeting. They are Sergeant First Class Maitland D. Wilson, age 38.
John? All right, I have three. First, I'd like to request that we adjourn in memory of Carmen Gloria Duran. She was the mother of our colleague, Mayor Pro Tem John Duran. She passed away suddenly last week. If you didn't get an opportunity to meet her, she was an incredible and remarkable woman. She became an activist with the United Farm Workers in the 1960s. She fought for quality education for Latino kids in particular. She served on the Los Nietos School Board in Whittier for 16 years as an elected official. She was also an LGBT activist at a time when it wasn't always popular in her community. She was an HIV and AIDS activist. She supported the Gay Men's Chorus by attending almost every concert for the past 2 decades. She was a very petite woman, just under 100 pounds. She was very small, but she was a mighty presence in her community, and we will miss her. And of course, we send our condolences to the family of our colleague. Also request that we adjourn in memory of Hassan Haghani. For those of you who've been around the city for a long time, Hassan was a former co-worker at City Hall. He was the senior planner in the city of West Hollywood from 1994 to 2002. He led the public process for redesigning Santa Monica Boulevard. He was known for his incredible personality, his outrageous Halloween costumes. He leaves behind his husband and partner of over 20 years, Haka Mordezai. And finally, I'd request that we adjourn in memory of Juan Chang Huang, also known as Jack. Jack worked at the sushi counter at Gelson's for many years. He was a familiar face to many of the West Hollywood staff and community members. He passed away suddenly, and he will be missed by many in our West Hollywood community. So I'd request that we adjourn in memory of all of those individuals. So we will now turn to presentations. And Lindsay, I believe you have 2 presentations tonight.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. First, I would like to welcome up Mr. Charles Cohen, whom we know obviously from our beautiful Pacific Design Center, a landmark destination here in West Hollywood. He's also the chairman and CEO of Cohen Media Group, and as the creative city, we certainly welcome our creative businesses. Since they were formed in 2008, they have received 8 award nominations in 10 years. And just when we thought award season was over, we still have creative and award-winning content being created right here in West Hollywood by our own business community. We want to, since then, these nominations include the 2017 Academy Award winner for Best Foreign Language Film, The Salesman, and the 2018 Academy Award nominated film for Best Documentary, Faces, Places, and Best Foreign Language Film, The Insult. And so we want to congratulate Mr. Cohen and Cohen Media Group for their success and on these critically acclaimed films, and we look forward to seeing what's next for you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's like old home week. Paul, it's been over 20 years. And I was just reminiscing in our office a few minutes ago that this will be, this week, my 19th West Week, which will be at the PDC on Wednesday and Thursday. And we're worried about the weather, but I think design will win out. So I'm very excited about that. And it was in 1999 that I first was fortunate to meet many of you and to purchase the PDC. So I look forward to celebrating our 20th sometime next year. So, and a lot of our tenants, original tenants, are renewing their leases, and I think it's, it's such a great testament to the effectiveness of the leadership of West Hollywood and its creative city mentality. So thank you all very much.
Thank you and congratulations.
And one very special presentation tonight as well. I'd like to welcome up Ruth Williams, obviously very well known in our community. Ruth has held many titles in our community over her many years of service. She currently serves as a public safety commissioner, where she's been serving since 1994, and she is currently the chair of that commission. I first met her while she was working as director of advocacy for NCJWLA, where we worked together, and she helped educate the community on issues such as child abuse, human trafficking, domestic violence, teen bullying, and human rights. Basically, if there was an issue worth fighting for, Ruth was at the front lines. She's lived in West Hollywood for almost 70 years and was active in the movement to incorporate West Hollywood. We know her as a founding mother of West Hollywood. Prior to serving on the Public Safety Commission, she served on the city's Rent Stabilization Commission and helped to draft the city's original rent stabilization laws. She's dedicated her life to advocating for and helping others, and through her efforts, she has helped to make West Hollywood a safer place to live and visit. She's also a tremendous mother and a wonderful friend, and I know that she will continue to serve our community for many more years to come. Today, we honor you because just recently, you celebrated your 80th birthday. And it's hard to believe, with all that you have done and continue to do, that you're 80 years old. You wear it well. And we're just so deeply grateful for all that you have done and continue to do for our community. We don't know what we'd do without you. West Hollywood wouldn't be the same without you, Ruth. And so we want to celebrate you and wish you a happy birthday.
You guys, thank you. Wow, I kept thinking what to say, and the thing that comes to my mind is it's hard to wrap your head around 80 years. My knees know that it's there, but it's, wow. And you think about it, and suddenly all the memories come flooding back. Three very special people here tonight that I've known forever. Figure a combination of almost 80 years between knowing Julie and Norman, and Drian, who's incredible. I love this city with my heart and soul. I love you all. And I have to commend each and every one of you for your commitment to this city. You know, you think about it, and I guess I am a mother and a grandmother to a wonderful family that put up with me all those years from the early 70s when I first met Norman, who used to babysit my kids. And the fight that we had for rent control back in the early 70s, and then when we realized we were going to lose it, how we all came together and created this incredible, incredible city. And I do feel like we took it from the baby and watched it grow and take the baby steps, and now look at what we've become. Worldwide recognition, respect, admiration for what we believe in. Equality, the protection for those that have nobody else to stand by them, each and every one of you. And it always bothers me when you get hit with the criticism and people don't realize what a fine council that we have, what a wonderful city to represent us and care, and really, really care. But it's like in a family, you're going to have your disagreements, but in the end, we all pull together. This means a lot to me, and I want to thank you. And I want to thank everybody here that stands up for our city and cares. And I can't say I'm going to be here another 80 years, but I can sure as hell try. Thank you.
Thank you, Ruth. I think that's our last presentation for this evening, so we'll now turn to public comment. Public comment is for items that aren't on the agenda or for consent calendar items that have not been pulled. The first speaker tonight, I'm calling out of order David Nash because we didn't get to him last time. I apologize for that, David. So David, to be followed by Tom DeMille.
Thank you, Mayor Heilman. My name is David Nash. I'm a long-term resident of West Hollywood. As a matter of fact, I have something in common with the other gentleman that spoke from the Design Center. I too live in a building, or he works at one. I live in a building that opened in 1999 and is a landmark building. And I have had a more pleasant and fulfilling experience than I ever imagined by living here in West Hollywood and living in that building. And for those of you that have supported it and continue to support it, I thank you very much. I'm just here tonight as a private resident that just happens to live there under no other capacity. I want to take a minute to thank my social service employee of the day, Perry Sloan Goodman. When I've had an issue under her purview, she's dealt with it so efficiently and effectively that it makes my head spin. I greatly appreciate that spirit in city employees. There is a problem that compels me to speak tonight that is a criticism, a shortcoming, but it didn't hit me until this August. There is a disability access problem in our Commons room at Palmview. You cannot get into the room or out of the room in a standard wheelchair. It was brought to the attention by professional social workers last September. 6 months later, the Housing Corporation told me that they were still contemplating how to deal with it and would announce their plans at our residents' meeting at the end of this month. For me, that's too little, too late. It speaks of a dysfunctional relationship between the Housing Corporation and the city. And I have to say that Lauren Meister, when you're right, you're right. At the last meeting, you spoke of the need for an emergency fund or a fund for urgent needs for the Housing Corporation. Addressing ADA compliance is not a luxury. It should be taken care of as soon as possible, and I asked Joel Hecht, our city mediator, to intervene on behalf of the residents. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Tom DeMille, to be followed by Karen Ayer.
Hi, I'm Tom DeMille. I guess this is a night of anniversaries. It's been 20 years since I've been standing at this podium. I wouldn't say tonight, but it's been 20 years. And 2 John, you brought me here. And John D'Amico, you look so far away from us tonight. After seeing those children killed in Parkland in Florida a few weeks ago, and you know, you can start just yelling out all the school shootings. There's just so many of them. God, just keep yelling them out, because Parkland was the last one. It's just the last one. And March for Our Lives is it's in front of the Sheriff's Station on March 24th. I know you all can't make it to Pershing Square. There'll be 1 million people at Pershing Square. There'll be 800 cities marching and growing and growing. The AR-15 is a killing machine. It will kill everyone in this room in 30 seconds or less. Just think about that. The sheriff doesn't stand a chance. Even the SWAT teams don't stand a chance against the AR-15. I know the city attorney could get you to do an emergency ordinance tonight banning the AR-15 from this city and start leading this country like you used to, and you stopped doing it a long time ago. It's time to lead. West Hollywood always leads the city, leads the country. And I hope you come to this march, because this march is important to children. This march is important to children. This march is important to all of us. We should not be settling for collateral damage. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tom. Kevin Burton, or Karen Ayers, to be followed by Kevin Burton.
Good evening, Mayor Heilman, City Council members. Happy Women's History Month. The Women's Advisory Board is pleased that we'll be hosting the Women in Leadership Awards and reception next week. We hope that you'll all join us. And for more information, WehoTV.org has all the information. We had another event which was going to be held tomorrow, but it has been postponed. The event featured a panel discussion about the Women Advisory Board's early years and its relevance from the 1990s to today. Apparently, city staff had to address concerns expressed by 2 city council members regarding who was asked to participate on the panel to discuss the founding of the WAB and who was not asked. The concerns seem to focus on one of our invited panelists, someone who was key to the founding of the WAB 25 years ago, and there was a suggestion to replace her with one of the council members. This gave us pause because it would have altered the purpose of the event and the conversation we wanted to bring to the city. We love it when council members get involved in our events. We love to see you at the events. We love you to participate in the events. But this felt a little different. It was difficult to get clarity from the 2 council members about why they wanted to make these changes to our special event, but it seemed to be motivated by a past grievance between the 2 council members and that particular panelist. This panelist was invited by the Women's Advisory Board for her experience and dedication in the early years of the board. So the WAB will convene at its next meeting on March 29th and determine what to do next. We will seek clarity as to our role as programmers for women's events in the city and how we can best navigate attempts to derail our events based on personal or political motivations. We will discuss this matter and try to determine how we can keep intact this event as we originally envisioned it. We welcome all input. We are reclaiming our time. Thank you.
Thank you. Kevin Burton, to be followed by Victor Omachenko.
Good evening, council members. I'm here to speak on item 2K, which directs staff to add a couple of priority items to improve safety on Fountain Avenue, and I thank council members Horvath and D'Amico for bringing this forward. I strongly support those recommendations, which include, firstly, adding the protected left turns to the intersection of Fountain and Fairfax Avenue, the green arrows that allow people to turn left. That's sorely needed, has been for many years. There are left turn pockets with no green arrow. And I bicycle, and I use that very intersection this evening to turn left from Fairfax Avenue on to Fountain Avenue to proceed west to come to this meeting. And it's no easier for a person on a bicyclist than it is for a person in a car, I can assure you. So it also provides, it's called a protected left turn. It's not only protection for left-turning vehicles, protection separates crossing of pedestrians from the turning of the vehicles. So this will improve safety for bicyclists, pedestrians, and drivers. And secondly, I also support the proposal to add a signal to the north side of Fountain at Poinsettia Place to improve navigating that little jog to continue north or from the north on Poinsettia Place. And the second part of the proposal, item 2, to widen sidewalks on Fountain Avenue. For people who live on the east side, as I do, I have seen more than once people in wheelchairs. They can't get by the poles and the narrow sidewalks. More than once I've seen this. They go out into the street, Fountain Avenue, navigate to the next driveway, and then go back up. Other residents have seen this. The sidewalks need to be widened in one way or the other. Thank you.
Thank you. Victor Omachenko, to be followed by Jeffrey Buck.
Good evening, Mayor, council members. I'm Victor Omolchenko, a longtime West Hollywood resident here. I'm happy with consent items 2K, 2L, and 2M. Yes, that additional Fountain Avenue traffic improvements, they are coming in time. We've been having lots of accidents on Fountain. I'm so happy to see that there will be left turn arrows at Fairfax and Fountain, maybe a light at Poinsettia. And I'm also happy to see that when the contractor came up with their Fountain Avenue traffic improvement study in December of 2017, here we are, mid-March, and we're already looking at improvements. And from the bicycling angle, I'm a member of the West Hollywood Bicycle Coalition. You know, one thing for the bicyclists is not every bicyclist likes to use the sharrows on Fountain. Some people, even people who use our bike share, green bikes, they might benefit from the widening of the sidewalks, because we know that in this city, bicyclists can be on sidewalks as long as they're careful. They watch out for pedestrians, and they're going in the direction of traffic. The next item, thank you so much for looking into Hart Park improvements. This is something that I, as a former public facilities commissioner, was urging the commission to look at issues of accessibility, to look at the historic nature of the park. And I know that the long-term lease is going to be up in 2019, and I always kind of fantasize, well, it's owned by the city of Los Angeles. The famous actor William S. Hart had left that to the city of Los Angeles, not the county. Maybe at some point, maybe we could even purchase that land. And for the last item on 2M, the Green Building Strategic Plan for City Facilities. Now's the time to get started. I know we have new staff in sustainability, and achieving zero net energy or carbon neutrality is something that we should look toward to. I'm sure that'll be in our new general plan, because we're aiming for that kind of achievement by 2015. And so looking into improvements for buildings at Plummer Park, the Coast Playhouse, newly acquired by the city, and Tara, Laurel Park, 1343 North Laurel, is very welcome. Thank you so much.
Jeffrey Buck, to be followed by Stephanie Harker, and I think that's our last speaker.
Thank you, City Council. My name is Jeffrey Buck. I've been living here for about 30 years, just retired from LA Unified after 31. I was able to attend a public services meeting last week at Plummer Park, chaired by Ruth Williams, and the public was there to speak about the homeless problem we are experiencing on the east side, and that's why I'm here tonight. I live on Sierra Bonita, right by Romaine, and Romaine is the border between West Hollywood and Los Angeles, as you are all aware. And what was going on at Poinsettia Park was very, very dangerous. For a while, we actually lost the park. You could not enter the park. The number of tents that were in front, and they were cleared away, and they've been cleared away for a week or two now. A few people were still camping out on this other side of the street by the electrical substation in Los Angeles. Now, this is really affecting our brand of West Hollywood, and it's dangerous. I mean, if you have a comprised immunity system like I do right now, you can't walk down there. It is so dirty. It is so dirty. As you walk by, people are asking for sex. They are defecating in public. They are doing terrible things that if I were to do them, I would be arrested. But it's not working out that way. So I would like to say we have a real problem on the east side. If you could, and I think it was a very productive meeting we had at Plummer Park last week. I would hope that you would call a special meeting so you could hear what's going on in town, because people have very, very serious issues. So I'm here just to ask you to help us to change the laws to make it, to help these people get off the streets. It's not a good place to live. It's not sanitary. It's not safe. Letting people live and go to the bathroom on the street is not helping them or anybody else. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jeffrey. Stephanie Harker, and that's our last speaker under public comment.
Good evening, Stephanie Harker, City of West Hollywood. I too wanted to thank Councilmember Horvath and Councilmember Meister, Mr. Leonard and Ms. Lovano for 2L. We're long overdue for particularly the ADA compliance with Hart Park. We've had the lease for 30 years, which means one of our parks has been inaccessible to many people who are have mobility challenged and cannot access that park. And I hope that will include the upgrading of the AIDS memorial that's there. It's small and quiet, and it's just a mess at the moment, so maybe we can get on that sooner. I also wanted to thank the members of the Public Safety Commission for their meeting on this last week. Thank you, Ruth Williams. I think the sheriffs, we have gone out and kind of checked out, and the sheriffs have held true to their promise to have black and whites around on the east side. This is after the murder that was about 3 weeks ago. I understand they have apprehended the suspect as well, which is good. But we need to keep it up on the east side. The crime has gone up and up and up. And I think we should stop mincing words and the percentages when you say that aggravated assault, which is, of course is assault with a weapon or causing major bodily harm, is 20% less. That could mean there were 4 murders instead of 5. Thank you.
Thank you. That's our last speaker under public comment. We'll now turn to council member comments. Who would like to begin tonight?
I'm happy to go first.
Okay.
So since our last council meeting, I represented the city at the California Contract Cities Association regular meeting, as well as at the National League of Cities, where I spoke on a panel helping to educate other local elected officials and staff on cannabis regulation and what we did here in the city. We were there also to lobby for infrastructure dollars as well as transportation funding. I was able to attend the transportation reception there along with representatives from Metro to continue lobbying for additional funding to support our northern extension of Crenshaw. I want to congratulate the Sheriff's Department. They participated this weekend in their annual Baker to Vegas event, and there will be a special presentation at our next meeting, but I did want to share the good news that they came in 3rd place in the invitational category, and they placed 48th overall out of over 280 teams that participated. It was an exceptional showing and really fun to witness, and so I want to congratulate them on their success. I also, since our last meeting, participated in the opening of the drop zones that are placed throughout our commercial areas that allow safe pickup and drop off from shared ride services. I know this is something that people talk about a lot, that they see Uber and Lyft drivers stopping in the middle of a lane, holding up traffic, causing all kinds of problems. People are running out into the street with oncoming traffic. And so now we have safer places for people to be able to get in and out of lifts. Not only are the designated zones indicated with signage, but they also are indicated on the app. Our staff worked well with Uber and Lyft to make these zones happen and to make sure that they're educating both drivers and riders alike. So I want to thank our staff and I want to thank my colleagues for supporting this effort. I think it's going to go a long way to helping to make sure our nightlife is safe for people getting in and out of shared ride service. And finally, I just want to say thank you to everyone in the community for your continued support and engagement. It's really a tremendous honor to serve this community, and all that you do to make our community better, to help us check into the issues that matter most to you is very much appreciated. So I just wanted to say thank you.
Thank you. Lauren?
Thank you, Mayor. Since our last meeting, I represented the city at the West Side City's COG board meeting where we discussed stormwater and potential county stormwater measure. We approved an amendment to the West Side City's COG legislative and policy platform to include a position on offshore drilling. We approved the scope of work for the development of the COG's multi-year sub-regional program plan. We approved the contract with the County of LA for homelessness sub-regional coordination, and we discussed future agendas to include nonprofit housing development and financing and the potential for HHH funds. I attended Metro's roundtable discussion with other chairs of the LA County COGs. We talked about each of our COGs priorities, and I reiterated ours with regard to expediting the northern extension of the Crenshaw line. I also noted that we expect a thorough environmental impact report with regard to the line, and noted that the COG's interest in active first and last mile transportation and microtransit, and our concerns regarding SB 827 and how it could impact Metro's support. I also attended the National League of Cities from Sunday to Tuesday, went home Wednesday, where I attended meetings and workshops on finance, cannabis, and affordable housing. Keynote speakers included Bob Schaefer and Senator Cory Booker, which was really nice to hear him speak. I'd like to ask the city manager to look into the accessibility issues at the West Hollywood Community Housing Corp building on Palm. Regarding 2F on the comprehensive annual financial report, I didn't pull it, but perhaps the city manager can address if he can address it briefly, the deferred outflow and inflow of resources related to pensions. Just want to know if we're in good shape. I couldn't tell if we're in good shape or not in good shape about that, so if he can just mention that in his report. I want to thank council members Horvath and D'Amico for item 2K, the Fountain Avenue improvements. It seems like every week there's another accident on Fountain. And regarding the recommendation on the sidewalks, I think that was something that was also included in the discussion of the pedestrian and mobility plan as directions from council, but it doesn't hurt to reemphasize the need for those sidewalks to be addressed. 2L, the plan for improvements to Hart Park. We need to get that lease in place as soon as possible, but in the meantime, this item directs staff to develop a plan for improvements to Hart Park as soon as possible. And our priorities are replacing the wood chips with something that our four-legged friends would like a little better, and also, of course, ADA compliance. I would also like to ask staff if there's any possibility that West Hollywood could purchase that property. I realize that was a gift to the city of LA, but we are already leasing it and taking care of it, and it's very important to us, so maybe that's something that they can look into. And the only other comment I have, I know that we pulled 4D on the Ethics Reform Task Force, that we tabled it, but I just wanted to mention that on page 1, the third bullet is actually not correct. It's not independent expenditure committees that have to disclose, but primarily formed committees. Some IEs are primarily formed committees and some are not. So if that can be corrected for the next staff report. Thank you.
Councilmember D'Amico.
Yes, sir. So I wanted to talk about a couple of quick items, including that I too attended the National League of Cities conference and went to several very interesting presentations about the infrastructure, specifically public safety in a disaster. Last year, the federal government spent $20 billion on disasters, and in 2016 was the last year that the federal government spent less than $5 billion, which had been the record for all the previous years up until 2016. So federal disaster dollars in the face of climate change have had a 400% increase in just 2 years, and they expect that to be continue to rise. And in fact, in our in California, Southern California, we have our own soon to be long-awaited, we don't know when it's coming, disaster of an earthquake, and there are federally supported disaster dollars for preparation, and maybe a city manager can ask staff to look into that. There is resiliency dollars available in the face of all this through FEMA. Also, I learned that Mr. DeMille, you'll be unhappy to hear this, but the House passed legislation for concealed carry, which means that if you can carry a gun in one state, you're allowed to carry a gun concealed in every state. That hasn't been taken up by the Senate, but that is another public safety disaster in the making as far as I'm concerned. And finally, there was quite a bit of discussion about the census, and $600 billion a year is spent based on census dollars. And there was to be a question about LGBT people in the 2020 census, which was removed by the Trump administration. So we encourage people in this community and across the country to fill out their census. There is a double whammy of cybersecurity as a hiccup in the interest of people to fill out their census online, especially in light of what we're learning even as recently as today about managed data. So I encourage everyone to fill out their paper census when they receive it and send it in. And speaking of the census, I wanted to mention, I'm happy to and excited to vote for item 5B, which is about the Russian events, the cultural month, and it's to bring even more excitement to that event. But there's a point in here in which it says that the Russian community is 15% of the population, and I'm thinking we need to really figure out if that's actually the case. It's my concern that it's not the case, and we're assuming it is, and we don't see the emergency that it is, that the Russian community is fast disappearing from West Hollywood, and we need to take care of making sure that the history of the presence of Russian-speaking people here is well documented, and that the future is saved. And so I think maybe just this assumption that it's, it was always 15%, it will always be 15%, I would like us to somehow check that. And I'm not sure how we would do that, City Manager, but I think it's worth the time, certainly, and the money that might be expended to do that. Two final things. I received a donation in my last campaign from the consultant representing the people with the hotel on item 3B, the Afria Consulting, and also on item 2M, which has been something I've been working on for many, many years here from this table and in my own professional work, which is a green building strategic plan for our own city facilities. And I won't bore you with discussing it. It's here. You can read it. You can find it online. But I just want to thank my colleagues for moving forward with this and all the other items, including the electric vehicle items before us tonight. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I wanted to report that John Duran also attended the National League of Cities conference in DC. We're required to report the meeting after we attend a conference, so I wanted to do that in his absence on his behalf. I did not attend the National League of Cities meeting in Washington, DC. Instead, I attended Mayor Garcetti's roundtable of LA County mayors, and we talked about a number of issues, including transportation, homelessness, as well as the census. I wanted to thank everyone in the city, especially the business community, for accommodating the LA Marathon that ran through here yesterday. I want to thank all of the public safety staff and our facility staff and our special events staff who were out there overseeing the event. I want to give a special shout out to John Kehoe, who ran yesterday and got his personal best in terms of his time. Congratulations. And we had 55 residents of West Hollywood who also ran and completed the marathon. So I want to give special congratulations to all of them. I do want to wish everyone in the Persian community Happy New Year's. It's Nowruz coming up in I think tomorrow night and Wednesday. So I want to wish everyone a Happy New Year. We heard your comments about homelessness on the east side. We have been working with LAPD as well as the LA City Council on an encampment that is over on the east side. It's right outside of the city of West Hollywood, but we've been working with them to try to clean that up. Living on the west side, I will tell you that we get as many complaints about homelessness on the west side, and we have serious problems on the west side. So it isn't just limited to the east side. It is something, unfortunately, that is occurring throughout the city. Tom DeMille brought up, he suggested that we ban certain assault rifles. I'm going to defer to the city attorney, but actually there is a statewide ban, which means that if we were to adopt a ban, we would be preempted. We previously had a ban on assault rifles, and we had to repeal it because we were preempted by state law. So if there is any additional regulation that we can have at the local level, we will certainly be bringing that forward. And then finally, I wanted to just echo what was said about the census. It isn't just a matter of being counted. It isn't just a matter of members of the LGBT community being counted. It's how we apportion representatives in the House of Representatives. So making sure that everyone in California is counted is important in terms of the national election and the efforts to retake Congress. Making sure that everyone is counted is also important in terms of federal funding. A lot of funding is based on your population, and it's the census population, not the population that we estimate. So we will be launching a campaign through the city. We already have staff people working on the census to ensure that everyone in West Hollywood is counted. We really need your help and your partnership to make sure every resident in West Hollywood is counted, whether they're housed or whether they're homeless, because every individual counts in the census. All right, so that completes council comments. Now we'll turn to the city manager's report. Paul?
Thank you, Mayor, members of the City Council. Real quickly, I did have one announcement that I was planning to make, and then I'll address some of the questions that came up. Since there's a lot of construction happening outside of City Hall, we decided to do more construction inside of City Hall. Starting this weekend, we're going to start a City Hall renovation project. The downstairs area at City Hall will be the area most impacted. All Commission Advisory Board meetings regularly held at City Hall will be held in other locations, whether it's Plummer Park or the library community room. The renovations will be to modernize access areas to provide greater levels of service and security for employees. Most notably, we will be installing a new staircase from the ground floor lobby area to the second floor at City Hall. This begins this weekend, and it should end in September, so it'll be 6 months worth of construction. The question regarding the population of people considering themselves of Russian ancestry. In 2000, the number was 15%. That recently, in 2013, dropped to 11%, so there has been a drop, so we are seeing that. In regards to CalPERS and our pension liability, it's a pay-as-you-go program. The city's portion is relatively well-funded. We also have a reserve set aside to help in years where the numbers may change. Some of the things going for us as a municipality, recognizing that this is a crisis of local government in California, fortunately, we're still a relatively young city. We have a number of employees that are in the first tier program, but we are starting the second tier program, which has reduced public benefits, retirement benefits for employees. Lastly, we're a contract city, so most of the cities that are really devastated by the pension costs are the full-service cities with the large public safety pensions, and we do not have those. So from that perspective, we're doing okay. We're fine. That concludes my report. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. We will now turn to the consent calendar. The consent calendar is a series of routine items that we approve with a single motion. Yvonne, what is the fiscal impact of tonight's consent calendar?
The fiscal impact with the addition of items 5B and 6A is $637,000 in expenditures, $0 in potential revenue, and $1,200 in waived fees.
Thank you. It's been moved. Is there a second? It's been moved and seconded. All those in favor, please push your button. And the consent calendar is now approved. Thank you very much. We will now turn to our first public hearing, which is amendments to the municipal code and zoning ordinance to require spaces in new construction to be plug-in electric vehicle ready. And Yvonne, how was this public hearing noticed?
As required by law.
Okay, do we have speakers? We have 2 speakers on this item. Do we need a staff report? At least a brief little introductory staff report, and then we'll take our speakers.
Okay, sure. Hi, City Council. My name is Robin Eason. I'm the Senior Sustainability Planner. I have to my side Sammy Taylor, who's the Assistant Sustainability Planner. Like you said, we come before you tonight with municipal code amendments for EV charging readiness. This is in response to a City Council directive dated May 2016 to amend the city zoning code to require minimum percentage of parking spaces in new construction to be PEV ready or equipped with stations, and also to allow installation of EV charging stations without considering it a loss of parking. Skipping ahead, I just wanted to go through really quickly the levels of EV readiness. That's okay?
Yeah.
Okay. This image here shows the 4 different levels of EV readiness. Obviously, the most understood are the no infrastructure or EV charger installed. What we did with our research is sort of look into the ability to be EV capable and EV ready. EV capable is spaces that are equipped with a tubing or a raceway in order to allow for a wire at some point to be snaked through to an access point in a parking space. And EV ready is essentially a space that has an access point with a wire already at an access point, so that you can just hook on an EV charger to that access point. We had to approach this in sort of 2 ways. A proposed building code amendment, since the state addresses EV charging, and then also a proposed zoning code amendment. So you see here is the proposed building code amendment. We exceed the state requirements quite a bit in terms of the increased number of percentage of spaces that we're requiring to be some level of EV readiness, in addition to actually requiring some spaces to be EV ready in addition to EV capable, whereas the state only requires spaces to be EV capable. And so what do these changes do? Well, they establish a new minimum threshold for EV charging for the city of West Hollywood, and hopefully we achieve some desired local policy outcomes. This includes just being more progressive to achieve some of the state goals and achieving the best balance between upfront spending and long-term avoidance of retrofit costs.
Great. Thank you. Sammy, is this your first council meeting presentation?
It's the first presentation I've been able
You
to
did
be
an
a part
excellent
of.
job.
Thank you very much.
As I said, we do have 2 speakers here, David Nevarez, to be followed by Gina Goodhill.
Mayor Heilman, while Mr. Navarez comes forward, Stephanie Harker wanted to express her support for the item.
Thank you.
Hi, good evening. My name is David Navarez. I'm from ChargePoint. ChargePoint is the leading electric vehicle charging network in the world. with more than 45,000 independently owned public and semi-public charging stations, including 70-plus charging ports located here within the city of West Hollywood. ChargePoint's network has helped drivers complete more than 31 million charging sessions, saving upwards of 30 million gallons of gasoline, driving more than 732 million gas-free miles. I just want to say thank you very much for the opportunity to comment, but more importantly, ChargePoint, we are here to commend the city of West Hollywood for the EV-ready building code here that's being under consideration. EV-ready building codes promote EV adoption by making sure building plans for EV infrastructure are there from the start. This significantly reduces installation cost on the driver, specifically when they go to actually look to install the piece of equipment that they're going to install. Infrastructure build-out is critical to meeting the needs of today's drivers, but more importantly, preparing for future growth. The governor has some ambitious goals of EV infrastructure goals of 250,000 EV chargers and by 2025 and 5 million zero-emission vehicles on the road by 2030. In particular, we strongly support West Hollywood's inclusion of power management as well as its applicability to existing infrastructure. That's also an impediment to EV adoption is the limitations of electrical infrastructure at existing buildings. Power management allows for stretching or the ability to add more ports than the available electrical infrastructure would allow. This is all already passed through National Electric Code. Most importantly, the readiness measure would only apply to new construction, which would leave a big gap from existing versus new developments. And the inclusion of power management really helps to make this a cost-effectiveness approach for the driver. So I'll end there.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Gina Goodhill?
Hi, thank you so much, Council, for taking public comment today. My name is Gina Goodhill, and I'm speaking on behalf of Tesla. Tesla is the world's leading manufacturer of fully electric, highly capable vehicles and EV powertrains. And we support West Hollywood's efforts to increase electric vehicle readiness in new construction and to make it easier for EV drivers and potential drivers to charge their car. Despite the many benefits of electric vehicles, I'm sure many of which were outlined in the presentation that has not been presented yet, but that will be presented. Many people are still really anxious about switching to an EV, solely or primarily because they're concerned about where to charge their car. Cities like West Hollywood can take a leadership role in helping to ease the transition for many people. And the staff's proposal is a really important first step in capturing the low-hanging fruit around charging barriers. So we hope that the council approves this proposal, and we hope that it's just the first of many EV readiness proposals that the city will put forward over the coming months and years. And we look forward to working with the city on this and other measures. Thanks so much.
Thank you. And that's our last speaker. Council questions or discussion? Councilmember D'Amico.
I just wanted to say that I receive a monthly update on the number of electric vehicles in the state. And there are currently 376,000 vehicles in the state, and there's 21,943 charging stations. So hopefully we can begin to level those two off a little bit. For Gina and David, the city in 2015 passed an electric vehicle plan with the goal of putting an electric vehicle charger within 1/8 of a mile of every resident. So I think this is a part of that effort, and I want to thank staff, specifically Robin and Sammy, for bringing this together and making this happen. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Councilmember Meister.
I'm glad that Councilmember D'Amico gave us those numbers. Do you happen to know what they'll be like in 10 years? So I'm asking that question because there is a recommendation, and then Planning Commission had an alternate recommendation that there, rather than being EV ready, that we actually require chargers. So I guess it really depends on what we think is going to be the, how quickly this is going to increase, that maybe we should be requiring, maybe for buildings, new buildings, 11 or more units, requiring the charger. And maybe even think about having an extra parking space that is a charger, that's sort of a guest space with a charger, so that every new building that happens will have this, will have the charger. And we're losing spaces all the time because of the new state laws, so maybe that would be a way to sneak in an extra parking space.
Yeah, we grappled with whether or not to go so far as to require EV charging stations with our original proposal. I think we ultimately decided to be a bit more conservative and err on the side of raising the minimums for the state for EV ready and EV capable. And that was really for three key reasons. One, we think that the ordinance that we're proposed is a substantial increase from what the state is requiring, and so we kind of wanted to see how implementation goes and see how we can tweak the ordinance over time, knowing that the 2019 building code cycle will probably require another set of EV charging requirements. We also know that there's cost premiums associated with each level of EV readiness, so EV capable costs more than just a regular space, onwards up to EV charging installed spaces, costing a premium over all of the other spaces. And then finally, when we were looking into accessibility requirements, there are some nuances associated with how much you have to size a space when you install a charger. And so there could be some instances where the installation of EV chargers actually results in a number of spaces being converted to either just EV charging only, or just ADA accessibility, or just both, which could, depending on how large your property is, it could make it problematic in terms of being able to serve your occupants with adequate parking. So we wanted to kind of look at those issues first before going so far as to require installation, and then maybe encourage some of the incentives that are out there for people to actually install stations, knowing that some developers will probably exceed our minimums anyway and install chargers on their own, depending on their property.
Councilmember D'Amico.
Thank you. I just wanted to add, because those are all actually really right on the money. And actually the money part of doing that is that if you install a charger, you either have to install one that would be from a vendor such as ChargePoint, or install one that's free. But if you were the owner of a building and had to install a charger that was free, then you would be paying for the gasoline, for the electric gasoline for that vehicle, and it wouldn't be part of your rent. It would just be charging that resident's car, and so that doesn't seem fair. But an owner, if they own that, can put in a charger. They sell their condo, they can take it out and take it to their new. So there is a premium. It's about, at this point, about $400, and maybe some getting an electrician to help install it. But it's sort of more complicated on the money side about who pays to charge the vehicle for them to use it every day. And I think in some way that's why I agree, even though I don't think there's a bigger proponent of electric vehicle charging in the city, but it does seem like it's unfair to require landlords and others to pay for charging for other people to drive around.
So does anyone want to make a motion?
I'd like to move that, people are hitting their buttons before I get to say, go ahead.
Go ahead.
I'd like to move staff's recommendation and close the public hearing, and that would be my motion.
Okay. And it's been moved and seconded that we close the public hearing and adopt staff's recommendation, which is to introduce this ordinance on first reading. Any further discussion? And let's go ahead and vote. And the motion carries. Thank you. We will now turn to our second public hearing, and Yvonne, I'm going to guess that this hearing was noticed as required by law. Am I correct?
Correct.
Okay. So this is a request to designate a building as a local cultural resource, enter into a Mills Act contract for rehabilitation and adaptive reuse of the building, and to approve a number of resolutions that allow for that reuse to occur. And who is going to give our staff report tonight? Jennifer.
1 second. Okay.
Mayor, before we begin, I'd like to disclose that I met with the developer and representatives of the developer in advance of this meeting to discuss the issue.
Other disclosures?
Yeah, I met with the developer's representative about items in the staff report.
As I mentioned earlier, the developer's representative made donations to my campaign in 2015.
And I think we're all familiar with the site and have been there. I've been to the site. I have previously met with the applicant, and I spoke to the applicant over the phone this last week. I also want to disclose for the record that the applicant is a former student of mine.
Thank you.
But that will have no bearing on my vote.
Good.
Okay.
Thank you, Mayor.
I don't know what his grade is. I don't think he ever came to class. No, he did. I'm teasing.
All right, well, on that note, the proposed project is, as you mentioned, for the rehabilitation of the site at the northeastern corner of Santa Monica Boulevard and Doheny Drive. The project is a 5,250 square foot commercial building. It was built in 1924, but it's been vacant since about 1992. And the existing billboard on the roof appears to be original to the building. The proposed project is including the designation of the property as a local cultural resource, a request to rehabilitate the site and reuse the site as a 6-room hotel with a new 2,600 square foot restaurant with outdoor dining along Santa Monica Boulevard. The applicant seeks approval of the following items by the City Council: the designation of the site as a local cultural resource, approval of a rehabilitation incentives including Mills Act contract, a waiver of off-street parking and loading, legalization of the existing billboard, and adaptive reuse of the building as a hotel and restaurant. And then also they're seeking approval of the entitlements associated with this request, which include the hotel, the restaurant with accessory alcohol, and the outdoor dining, and the certificate of appropriateness. With respect to the designation as a cultural resource, the site qualifies under criterion A, which exemplifies special elements of the city. The site reflects significant geographical patterns, including those associated with the streetcar era and the settlement along the red car line, which traveled Santa Monica Boulevard. And the site also has a unique location in the city at the Gateway, and it represents a view that has long been established for those entering the West Hollywood from the west. Among the many character-defining features of the site, many are still intact. A few of those are the prominent location at that corner, the chamfered corner entrance, original decorative moldings surrounding the doors and windows, and the fenestration pattern on both first and second floors. With respect to the rehabilitation incentives being requested, the applicant is asking for the city to approve a Mills Act contract. This contract would allow an alternative method of calculating property tax, which often results in a lower tax rate. In exchange, the property owner commits to a rehabilitation plan to help rehabilitate the property and maintain the historic resource. The applicant is also asking that the council use a rehabilitation incentive to waive the requirement for 14 off-street parking spaces and 1 off-street loading space. Providing the on-site parking on the site would be impossible. The building takes up almost the entire land area. And the waiver is a trade-off to allow the site to be utilized and activated for the first time in a really long time. The Planning Commission added a condition that the applicant work with the city to prepare a traffic and circulation plan that would be approved at a later date, and the applicant is already taking steps to work with us for that, so that's underway already. The applicant is also requesting an adaptive reuse of the site as a hotel and restaurant. These uses are allowed in the CC1 zoning district and encouraged in this area in the land use element of the general plan. And finally, the applicant is asking for legalization of the existing billboard. The billboard has likely been there since the building was built and is therefore legal non-conforming, but if it were destroyed or removed for any reason at all, it could not be replaced according to the municipal code. And so with this legalization, the sign would remain in place as is, and if it were to be proposed for any changes of any kind, it would have to come in for a certificate of appropriateness. So it would have a high level of scrutiny of any changes, but they're not proposing any changes to it at all, to the billboard itself. The applicant is also seeking approval of the entitlements for the proposed hotel and restaurant, including, among other things, a certificate of appropriateness for the work to the historic resource. The Historic Preservation Commission unanimously supported the project, but voted to recommend that the upper roof deck area not be used. The HPC determined that the elevator shaft interfered with the billboard structure, negatively affecting the view of the building from the east. HPC also found that this was not consistent with the Secretary of the Interior standards, which are a set of guidelines that govern treatment of historic buildings. Additional information has been provided by the applicant in response to this recommendation from the HPC, and that was included in the packet. And the memo describes in more detail how the elevator overrun feature would affect the billboard structure itself. The Planning Commission also reviewed this item and voted unanimously to support the project and recommended allowing the use of the upper roof deck portion of the site, noting that the limited space on the property and the value of outdoor space as an amenity for hotel users is valuable in this area. Ultimately, of course, it's up to the City Council to decide whether it's appropriate to use the upper roof deck area and whether the amenity would outweigh any potential effect on the cultural resource. So to summarize, the proposed project would activate a long vacant site at the gateway to the city in a very prominent location. The designation of the site would ensure that this building is protected and that any alterations would be reviewed with a high level of scrutiny. The rehabilitation incentives are proportionate to the rehabilitation plan and the work being considered and are necessary to ensure ongoing successful use of the site. The proposed hotel and restaurant are permitted in the zoning district and are both uses that are encouraged in the city's general plan. And staff supports the proposed project, and I'm here, as well as our historic consultant, Robert Chattel, is also here if you have any questions. Thank you.
Are there any questions for staff at this point?
I have two questions.
Sure.
First, can you please clarify the use on the rooftop? There was a question in terms of what was presented at Historic Preservation Commission versus what was proposed at planning and is now before us in terms of the number of people allowed and how it would be used. So can you clarify that?
The use has always been solely for the hotel guests and guests of guests. I mean, it's never been a public space. It's never been associated with the restaurant uses. When it went to Historic Preservation Commission, staff was recommending a condition saying that a maximum of 8 people could be out there at any given time on the upper roof deck area. When the Historic Preservation Commission recommended prohibiting use of that area, then that condition went away. But it was carried, everything carried forward to Planning Commission. When it went to Planning Commission, the commission opted to increase that allotment of people up there, the maximum number of people up on the upper roof deck area to be 15. Feeling like that was a more appropriate number given the 6 hotel rooms and potentially more than 1 guest in each room and so forth, that it could potentially be more people than 8 needing to be up there. So that was the difference in those numbers. Neither of those numbers was derived by any calculation for occupancy or anything like that, but the use has always remained the same.
And then there was an issue regarding the elevator that would allow access to the roof. The staff indicated that this issue has been addressed since it was discussed at Historic Preservation. Can you talk a little bit about what happened with the elevator and where we are now and how we got there?
So staff recommendation at Historic Preservation Commission included the proposed project as is, which included both of the roof deck areas and the elevator shaft to access it because it needs to be accessible. So when that issue came up at the Historic Preservation Commission, that we hadn't looked more deeply into that particular issue of how it affects the structure of the billboard. So once that recommendation happened, the applicant went back with their historic preservation consultant and got into more detail of how exactly would that elevator shaft and specifically the penthouse overrun that goes above it would affect the structure of the billboard, and created the memo that was then attached to the council staff report. So that information wasn't readily available at Historic Preservation Commission because it wasn't considered to be a significant effect on the building.
Okay. Do we have public speakers on this item? Who is going to be representing the applicant here? You will. Okay. Thank you, Taylor. And is 5 minutes sufficient for you?
I'm going to do it in quicker than that. How about
Okay.
that?
But we will give you 5 minutes.
You
And
got
you'll
it.
have 2 minutes for rebuttal if necessary.
Sounds good. Good evening, Mayor Heilman and council members. My name is Taylor Megdal. I grew up in this neighborhood. Oh,
Uh-oh.
fumble. Okay, there we go.
Oh, we have a PowerPoint.
Clicker, yeah, oh, we're not messing
Okay.
around, Mayor. Okay.
All
Good evening, Mayor Heilman and council members. My name is Taylor Megdal. I grew up in this neighborhood and currently live just a half-mile up Doheny from the building. Each time I pass by this building, I wonder why this treasure of a building is boarded up and marvel at its unrealized potential. As Jennifer discussed, we are proposing to renovate the building with a restaurant on the ground floor and a 6-room micro hotel on the second floor. Our intent is to attract a flagship full-service restaurant akin to Gracias Madre, Laurel Hardware, etc., but with a different genre and twist in cuisine. We have not yet secured an operator for the restaurant. However, we are actively working to secure the perfect operator by this summer. We are also excited about creating the Micro Hotel, which is a new trend in hospitality geared towards travelers that want a more localized and immersive experience. The closest example to our project is the 9-room Hotel Covell in Los Feliz. Although our project will be notably unique and distinguishable both in design and historical stature comparatively. While our on-property amenities will be limited, our featured amenity will be our world-class location at the gateway to wonderful West Hollywood, with walkability to unlimited dining, shopping, and nightlife, which will all provide an immersive experience for our visitors. We are so excited to present our vision for bringing this nearly 100-year-old building back to life and prominence. My partners and I have been trying to acquire this for the last 10 years from the owner. Being able to rehabilitate this historic property and transform it so that it will be used and enjoyed will be a dream come true for me personally and professionally. We appreciate all of the input we've received from the city's historic preservation consultant, as well as all of the city staff. Without further ado, I would like to introduce my colleague Dave Thompson with Latham & Watkins.
Good evening, Mayor and council members. I'm Dave Thompson, a senior project manager with Latham & Watkins. We really appreciate that both the Historic Preservation Commission and the Planning Commission voted unanimously to support this project. The project, as approved, including those actions, designating the building, and the very important rehabilitation incentives. Without those rehabilitation incentives, Taylor and his partners really could not move forward with the project. I'd very quickly like to walk you through the building. On the ground floor, we have the restaurant that opens out onto Santa Monica Boulevard. On the second level, we have the 6 guest rooms and a small roof terrace on the north side of the building. To preserve the historic nature of the building, none of the guest rooms have balconies or outdoor space. On the roof, we are planning a beautiful rooftop garden and 500 square foot terrace that's been part of the discussion so far. We have heard from hotel consultants that outdoor space is really critical to make a hotel in Southern California successful. The roof decks are much needed outdoor space as an amenity to the hotel. As Jennifer discussed, the roof decks will be very controlled, no more than 15 hotel guests and their guests that allowed at any one time, a limited number of special events. The Planning Commission very generously recommended that we be allowed to have 2 special events per year. We're requesting a modest increase to 4 special events per year for the roof decks, so that'd be approximately 1 per quarter. Also, like to very briefly mention and follow up what Jennifer was saying. At the time the project was presented to the Historic Preservation Commission, they didn't have all of the information that we then subsequently came forward to staff with, and that primarily being that the amount of impact that would really happen to the support structure of the sign is just 12 feet of one support structure, which amounts to about 8% of the support structure, a really minimal impact to it. One other item that we'd like to talk to you about very briefly is condition 2.5 that Jennifer mentioned, the unloading and loading circulation plan that the Planning Commission recommended and required us to come back with. We'd like to ask, because this is a very technical plan in nature, that we come back to the Deputy City Manager for approval rather than the Planning Commission. And we'd like to ask that, in addition to your support for the staff's recommendation, just those two changes, an addition of 2 additional special events per night, so 4 per year, excuse me, 4, and the change that the circulation and loading plan be approved by the Deputy City Manager. Thank you. Our staff is available if you have any questions.
Okay. Any questions? All right, we'll turn to the speakers on this item. Yvonne, I don't see any.
Yes, there's Victor Omachenko.
No, it's not coming up on my screen.
Okay. I can.
Oh, here they are. Okay. We do have speakers on this item. Bobby Edrick, to be followed by Zach Zalbin. I skipped Victor. I'm sorry, Victor Omachenko. Okay, we'll let Bobby and then Victor.
Hi, Bobby Edrick, West Hollywood.
Bobby, can you move the mic down just a little so we can hear you? Thank you.
Okay. As captain of the Norma Triangle Neighborhood Watch, and on behalf of the Triangle, we want to express our utmost support for the proposed project at 9091 Santa Monica Boulevard. I have lived on Norma for 30-plus years, gives away my age, and for many years this building has sat boarded up, empty, and an eyesore, a shameful entrance into our city. This building dates back to our streetcar era of the 1920s, and we are thrilled that this developer wants to return the structure to its former glory and finally give us a proper, beautiful gateway into West Hollywood. After 25-plus years, this building has been vacant. The proposal before you will not only restore the building, give us life to the end of Santa Monica Boulevard, but most importantly, will remove the blight in our neighborhood and restore a fine example of architecture from the streetcar era. And hopefully with the Melrose Triangle, parking will probably not be a problem. On behalf of the Triangle, we ask you to please move this project forward. I thank you for your considerations.
Thank you, Bobby. Victor Omachenko, to be followed by Zach Zalbin.
Good evening, Mayor and Council members. Well, I'm Victor Omachenko, a longtime West Hollywood resident, and I'm here speaking on behalf of the West Hollywood Preservation Alliance, and we're urging all of you to designate the building, the streetcar-era building, at 9091 Santa Monica Boulevard as a local cultural historic resource here in the city of West Hollywood. We're really happy that the Historic Preservation Commission and the Planning Commission voted unanimously to support this project, and we look forward to the building's rehabilitation and adaptive reuse. And adaptive reuse is what's going to make this building go. They're planning a small boutique hotel on the top and a restaurant along the bottom. And they're going to keep this historic billboard. It's been around as long as the building. That's what our research has shown. They're going to keep the historic billboard, and they're going to make some room for engagement for people, the guests and a couple of visitors, to go up on the roof. I like that idea. The building is also, it's a very rare early example, I think, of mixed use that's now much more prevalent in our city, because the second floor, when it was built in 1924, I like these kind of details, it was actually 4 one-bedroom residential apartments. And now they're going to be made smaller, and they're going to be turned into 6 hotel rooms. So for nearly 90 years, almost a century, this building has served as a highly visible anchor at the western gateway into our fine city, and the WPH believes that it sustains sufficient integrity to be designated as a cultural resource, and plans for its adaptive reuse are very well thought out. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Zach Zalbin, to be followed by Steve Martin.
Hi, my name is Zach Zalbin. I'm a Beverly Hills resident and a West Hollywood property owner. I just wanted to give my support for the project. I think it'll take a corner that has tremendous vehicle traffic, but unfortunately there's a lack of pedestrian traffic because there's not a whole lot at the corner. But hopefully if this project gets approved, it'll help bring a lot of life back to a corner that hasn't seen much in 25 years. So I hope you guys approve it. Thank you.
Thank you. Steve Martin, to be followed by Matt Dubin.
Steve Martin, West Hollywood. I don't want to contradict Victor, but I understood that back in 1926 that upstairs was a bordello. Now, that still probably is mixed use, but be that as it may, this is a great project. This is the project we've been waiting over 25 years to see. I know a lot of you have been very anxious to see this move forward, and it's been a long, long wait. They're asking for a lot of concessions. I think they're all worth it. I think at some point in time, we may need to lose some parking spaces so we can use them for Uber and Lyft's drop-off places. And I think which would help actually all of the area over there. A couple years back, we stayed in a beautiful 300-year-old building in Rhodes, and it had a wonderful rooftop garden. It was just a great place to meet other guests, enjoy the beautiful weather that's just like here, and it really was a great enhancement. So anything that we can do to, cut them some slack on that, I think is going to be good. And just if you'll indulge me just a minute, I just want to thank John Heilman for your really loving memorial of Hassan Agani, who was one of our senior planners, and he was just so wonderful, so enthusiastic, and he just loved the city. And he was great when we did the Santa Monica design. And thank you for all those kind words.
Thank you. Matt Dubin, and that's our last speaker.
Good evening, Matt Dubin, West Hollywood. Hello, council members and mayor. I want to speak in support of this project. I think it's fantastic to see adaptive reuse, to see designated buildings. Please keep designating buildings. We need more of those. We need more preservation. And the only thing I want to note is that we lack, with the Mills Act, we lack enforcement. And as a resident of a building that is a Mills Act recipient and with an ownership that are getting tax incentives and not holding up their end of the bargain, the city staff is under-resourced, it seems, to be able to actually enforce the contracts. And I really want to urge you, while we're going through this process of designating buildings and giving tax incentives, which is the best thing we can do, to make sure that the flip side is available for staff. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mayor Heilman?
Yes.
There were a few people who didn't wish to speak but wanted to express their support for the item. Norman Shremoff, Jeffrey Buck, Scott Ferguson, Kevin Burton, and Stephanie Harker.
Thank you. You do have 2 minutes for rebuttal. I don't know if you need it. Dave, are you going to take it?
We are not going to take it. Just going to mention that we've heard nothing but support this evening, so we would appreciate yours. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Any questions for the applicants? All right. I guess I'll close the public hearing then. If there's no objection, we'll close the public hearing. And now, questions for staff or council discussion? Councilmember Meister.
Yeah, I just had a question for staff. Are there 6 parking spaces then? Because I couldn't, there are 6, right?
There are no parking spaces on site. They were, the way that our code is written, they get a credit for the previous uses that were on the site when it was active. And so there's when a building is reused in a use that's more intense than the previous use, we ask that they provide the difference between the previous use and the more intense use, and that's the 14 parking spaces.
So there were never 6 spaces there?
No.
Okay.
So that 6 number is grandfathered essentially because of the previous use, and they would have to come up with the difference, and they're asking that we waive that as part of the incentives for historic preservation.
Exactly, thank you.
Okay. I had a couple of questions based on the applicant's request. It sounds like they are requesting that they have 4 special event permits rather than the 2 that were granted. If we were to agree to that, is that an easy fix with the resolution before us?
Yes, that's easy to take care of.
Okay, and then the circulation plan, it sounded like the Planning Commission required that circulation plan to come back to them for approval, and it sounds like they're requesting that it be approved by staff. Is there a way that we can kind of split the difference where it's approved at the staff level with a report back to the Planning Commission?
Yeah.
I don't know what my colleagues think about that, but that's an idea that I wanted to throw up. And then my other question has to do with the signage. And it's strange to me that we would be saying that a billboard is part of a historic structure when normally as a city we want to get rid of billboards, not preserve them. I'm a little bit concerned about, I have no problem keeping the billboard, and I understand that that's kind of a necessity for this project to work. But I'm concerned that if we designate it historic, every time they want to make a change, they're going to have to go through the Historic Preservation Commission just to change the billboard structure if that were ever necessary.
They would have to get a certificate of appropriateness for any change. If it is minor and doesn't affect the resource in any way, there's a list of types of changes that can be approved at staff level, at an administrative level. That's relatively, it's similar to other types of permits for that type of work. It's slightly more review, but not as onerous as having to go back to the commission. If they're going to make any changes that would be substantial to the actual fabric of the resource, then it would have to go back to commission, yeah.
Okay. So council questions, discussion? Oh, I'm sorry, Councilmember D'Amico.
So, thank you, Mayor. I support this item. I think it's really great. I'm maybe the halfway point is to have staff bring this to the Transportation Commission. I mean, I think we could, they could make a decision and make a presentation to the Transportation Commission. I think they will be faced with more and more challenges around Uber and Lyft and parking spots and drop-offs, and I think this is a good item for the Transportation Commission to consider with a staff recommendation. It's a little perhaps less complicated, David, than the Planning Commission, and I'm not with respect to the Planning Commission, I'm not actually sure that they would know whether or not the staff's decision was right anyway, and the Transportation Commission might have more input on that. In terms of the signage, I had a different sort of splitting of the hair. This building has no signage on it. It doesn't have a restaurant name, it doesn't have a hotel name, and we're going to have to somehow accommodate that signage. I'm sure it will be based on the square footage at the front times the number of windows minus the number of bricks, whatever it is that comes up with that. But I think in some way we need to have a fairly good sense that it will be consistent with what's happening, and I just wanted to point out that I'm guessing the staff, you know, John and his staff are certainly capable of doing that, but I just noticed that this rendering, you know, it doesn't really sort of give us a sense of how the building works from a visual cues about the entrance to the restaurant, the entrance to the hotel, et cetera. And then as in terms of the structure of the billboard, in my mind, it is an important piece. I mean, that sort of tensile steel structure reaches all the way back to the Eiffel Tower. I mean, it really is about how in the early 20th century, late 19th century, mid 19th century, that kind of structure was used to support very large items, and it wasn't stone, it wasn't wood, it was actually steel, and it sort of was a new way of thinking about the making of structure. So I actually see that as an important piece of this. It is consistent with early billboard infrastructure, and as our city moves forward in replacing them, all they would really possibly ever come up with is a big steel drum pounded through the center of the building, poking out the top, holding up the sign. So I'm not sure that's really consistent with what's happening there historically. So I think it's the right move to declare that historic. But those three things I have some flexibility about, and ultimately I'm just glad that finally this building will have some actual use on that corner.
Jennifer, just to follow up on that comment, I don't see anything, and maybe I missed it in the resolution of approval, requiring them to submit a signage plan for the building. Is that somewhere in there, or is that something that can be easily, I mean, they'd be required to do it anyway?
Exactly. It's separately required by the code that they would, any business identification signage would require a certificate of appropriateness. It's a specific section for signage.
So we don't need to include that in our resolution today?
It doesn't have to be, no.
Okay.
Comments to follow up with Councilmember D'Amico's requests on the billboard. I agree. I think it should be kept historic, and we should try to keep it as the way it is now as much as possible. I do have a concern about the elevator, though, in terms of aesthetically what it looks like from Doheny, and I'm just wondering, is there anything that we can do to make that a little bit better looking from the Doheny side of the project? I don't know if maybe we can put plants around it or something, but I think something needs to be done so it's not this big, thing from Doheny, because it's not like Doheny is some little alley. It's one of our main corridors.
We could include a condition of approval that they continue working on that to find a way to make it fit in with the building more. It looks like the applicant is okay. No. I think that they would probably be open to working on that a little bit more. Yeah, and then the other piece is that it's not taking up the entire lattice work of the billboard. The billboard structure will still be visible from the corner there. In fact, the vast majority of the billboard structure will remain intact and as is, and the elevator overrun, it will be visible, but it won't be as prominent as I think.
Well, if there's anything we can do, I don't know if David wants to speak to that.
We did close the public hearing, but I'll reopen it.
Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. In consulting with the architects, they said certainly there are things they can do with materiality and landscaping to minimize the visual impact of the elevator overrun.
Okay, so I would ask that that be a requirement, and then I think sending the circulation plan to Transportation Commission is appropriate, and then what I would suggest is that staff brings it to Planning Commission just as an information item, and I'm okay with the 4 special events a year.
Your last point, you were okay with the 4 special, okay.
Thank you, Mayor. Can you address the comment that was made about how we enforce our Mills Act requirements?
In general?
How we plan to do it for this project?
Well, the state somewhat recently adopted a new requirement that we look at Mills Act and do inspections on properties with Mills Act contracts every 5 years. So we're working on getting caught up on that. We've made a lot of headway in general in our Mills Act program, which I think you'll be hearing about relatively soon. On this particular project, it would go into the queue. It would be inspected probably sooner than 5 years, seeing as a lot of the work is front-loaded because they want to do a lot of this work before they open, and the building is in really rough shape. So honestly, it would probably be before the 5 years are up that we'd be out there to take a look, and we can update the Mills Act program at that point. So that would be how we would do enforcement. The Mills Act is a rolling 10-year program. So there are, if you're speaking strictly of enforcement, there's a lot of opportunity once a property owner has been notified that there may be a problem, they have time to rectify the issue. And also we have, as you know, our consultants on call, which is Chattel Inc., and they have been helping us with the Mills Act inspections that we've been doing recently. And they've helped us develop the program for this building, and they would help us in the future with inspections as well.
Great, thank you.
Mr. DeGracia, did you want to add something?
No, Jennifer got it.
Okay.
So when I first heard of the additional request for 2 additional special events, I was concerned what the neighborhood would think, but as represented by the neighborhood here tonight, they are supportive of that request. So as long as they're supportive, I'm happy to support it. I think that this location has long felt like a building in support of a billboard, and now we actually have an activated use, something that's actually going to benefit the neighborhood, and something that is consistent with what we look for in West Hollywood. I'm glad that to see that it's an adaptive reuse. I think it's a very smart way to bring back what was once great about the building, but also bring it into the 21st century and have it be consistent with the culture and nightlife that we do have on that side of town. I think to address staff addressed the issues of the rooftop use, that it was intended for guests only on a regular basis, that it's not a restaurant use, and that they've ensured accessibility. So I think my concerns around those issues have been addressed by the comments here tonight. So I would be supportive of staff's recommendation with the additional requests by the applicant.
So it sounds like there is a pretty strong consensus on the council to support this item, with the change to the special events, to change that from 2 per year to 4 per year. The change that Councilmember Meister made, which is to require the applicant to improve the appearance of the elevator shaft or screen it to the satisfaction of staff. I think that some language along those lines. And then the only other issue is the circulation plan. There's been a suggestion that rather than it go back to the Planning Commission for a noticed public hearing, that it could be taken to the Transportation Commission for approval on a regular agenda. Is that something that you're comfortable with, taking it to transportation?
Yes.
Okay. And is there agreement?
Yeah, just to bring it to Planning Commission as an information item.
Yeah.
Afterwards.
Okay.
Okay. Any further discussion? So I'd entertain a motion to that effect. There has been a motion to approve all of those recommendations with the changes that have been made. There's been a second.
And if I need to restate that we closed the public hearing again.
Oh, yes,
since
we
you
did
reopen.
reclose the public hearing. Thank you. Thank you for that. All right. Yvonne, you have all of that? Okay, so we'll go ahead and vote. It's been approved. Thank you, everyone. Great. All right, we're going to take a quick break as staff is coming up. We have, I think, 3 more items, 4A and 4B and 4C we're combining together. So if we can keep the break quick. No, 4B and 4C. All right, we're going to call the meeting back to order. We have 3 remaining agenda items. Our next one is an updated analysis of live-work facilities in the home business ordinance. This is item 4A, and who's going to be giving the staff report?
Hi, I'm
Hello.
Tara Worden. I'll be presenting this evening. Good evening, Mayor and council members. So we have revisited this several times. If you recall, council directed staff to evaluate the home businesses and live-work ordinances to determine a policy direction that would better address the needs of the changing economy. So in this new economy, technology and communications have significantly changed the way that businesses can operate. And in addition, there's things like the maker movement that have really brought to light e-commerce and given way to brick and mortar retail shops. So this new economy calls for new regulations, and these new regulations are intended to retain small and creative businesses, incubate startups and artists, and enhance work from home options. So this is just a very brief overview. I'll get into this in the next coming slides. For this evening, we have 2 recommendations on the floor. One's regarding home businesses, which is in residential zones, and then live work would be specifically in commercial zones. So home businesses, when we last spoke, when this item was last before you, we discussed, there were questions about what are they and where are they permitted. So home businesses are businesses permitted to operate out of a residence, provided that they do not negatively impact the residential character and the peaceful enjoyment of the property by other residents. There's a few regulations that come along with the home businesses. A business tax certificate is required. Client visits that are, if a business operates with clients, they're required to get an administrative permit. They're not allowed if the same business operates within a commercial zone within 300 feet of a residence, and only 1 additional employee is allowed from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. And once again, these are only permitted in residential dwelling units. So we collected data from the business tax certificate database and mapped this information. So you can see these business operations and residential units are located throughout the city. There's no sort of clustering in one area or another, so we approached it just as a policy approach. There's 1,245 home businesses operating in the residential units in West Hollywood. And so as a staff recommendation, we suggest to direct staff to amend the zoning ordinance to allow for up to 2 employees in addition to the resident on the premises between 8 a.m. and 8 p.m. So there's some potential pros and cons associated with this staff recommendation. One would be, the potential pros could be to provide home businesses the ability to scale up their operations without incurring the cost of overhead associated with leasing office units or so. But there could be impacts to that, introducing traffic into residential areas and increasing parking demand on residential streets. Staff recognizes these cons, but potentially there's it's offset by keeping and growing startup operations in the city. So moving right along to the live work item. Again, when we were last here, we talked about what are live work units and where are they currently permitted. So here's just some brief clarification. Live work units are an integrated unit and working space occupied and utilized by a single housekeeping unit in a non-residential building or commercial zoning district, or in a building specifically designed or constructed to provide live work units. And again, there's regulations that come along with this. These are the ones that really are what staff looked at to address. The first is that the first 50 feet, the floor area depth of a ground level unit must be committed to commercial retail sales. There's also 750 square foot minimum unit size. Parking standards are at a commercial parking rate of 3.5 per 1,000 square feet. Units must, on the ground level, also must have a pedestrian-oriented frontage, and the one employee must reside in the unit. Otherwise, additional employees are added as necessary. And again, this is specifically in commercial zones. It's a commercial use. So here's just an example of live work in WeHo. This was redone in 2001. It operates as a live work unit and it is currently occupied. This is located at Santa Monica and Vista. Here are 3 live work units located on Detroit Avenue in the new project, The Dillon. These are ground floor units, so they maintain a pedestrian-oriented frontage. And at the time this photo was taken, there were no retail sales going on, but there was signage in the front that indicated it does happen. So we looked at some other additional live work in the general area. So this is a live work development on Pico, and this is an architecture firm. Unfortunately, it is beautiful. It's a great project. It's got a living space above, workspace below. This would not be permitted under current code because it does not have the first 50 feet of floor area depth is not commercial retail sales. Here's another example. This is in Larchmont. This is a 3-story, 4-unit townhome type of live work. And if you see there's this yellow box around the ground floor, you recognize there's no commercial retail sales, therefore it would not be allowed in West Hollywood. Moving right along, this is the floor plans for that development, and this ground level entry has washer dryer hookups and a sink for a washroom, as well as an entrance from the garage. And here's a larger live work development. This is 27 units on Highland, just near Melrose. And again, it's kind of difficult to see in this image, but the ground floor aspect of it has no ground floor commercial. So again, this would not be allowed in West Hollywood under the current regulations. And here is, again, the illustration of the site plan. So to address those issues, we have one alternative, and then this is going to be the second alternative that we're looking at for the land use definition. So currently, live work is a commercial use regulated in a commercial zone, but it is by nature also a residential use. So the pros of keeping it a commercial use in a commercial zone, it protects the character and charm of residential neighborhoods by keeping it in a commercial zone, concentrating the noise and traffic and parking impacts that are associated with a commercial use. The cons, however, are the live work units are not included in the inclusionary housing requirements and are therefore not included in the total unit count when affordable housing is applied to the development. So live work units are never designated as capital A affordable. So staff recommends that we just tweak the use to a residential use permitted only in commercial zones. And then that would allow for the affordable housing requirements to be applied to the residential use. So, for example, if you have a project of 20 units, the application of the affordable housing requirements would require 4 of those units to be affordable. If you have, if that same development has 20 units and then say 10 additional live work units, those 10 additional live work units would not be included in that total unit count, so therefore would never be allocated as affordable. We can revisit that if there's questions. So in summary, we have the first alternative is to address some of the design guidelines or design standards and parking standards that are seen as inhibitive to live work in West Hollywood. And then this alternative, the second alternative, is to address the goals that we've stated as a city to incorporate affordable housing for artists in West Hollywood. There's a third alternative that council could consider this evening. Staff does not recommend proceeding in this direction, but we can continue to explore it. Live work, and that's the live work overlay. So a live-work overlay would identify locations that could potentially be fitting for live-work developments. Some of the initial locations that we've talked about and explored would be the areas on Fountain Avenue, Vista Gardner, Willoughby, properties adjacent to commercial alleyways, and even legal non-conforming commercial buildings in residential zones. To incentivize live work in these overlay zones, there could be specific incentives attached to these areas. So it could include things like increased FAR for things like reusing existing structures or further reduction in parking requirements. And design standards could be attached to this overlay zone as well, requiring, for instance, a resident production space for makers or creative people. It could also dictate massing and street facade transparency. These pros could concentrate live-work development in the desired locations. There's a similar cons list would be the on-street parking demand if parking reductions are utilized, an increase in mass if an increase in FAR is utilized, or the fear of most live-work developments is that residential reversion will eventually occur in that workspace is not used as workspace, but rather converts back to residential over time. So here are a list of our recommendations for council to consider. If you have any questions, we are available here.
Are there questions? Are there any speakers on this item, Yvonne? Okay. Then there are two aspects of your recommendation. One has to do with employees in home businesses. The other is the more complicated issue of what to do, if anything, with respect to our existing live-work regulations. Do we want to try to tackle the first question first?
Sure.
Okay. Thoughts on allowing an increase in employees for home offices, home businesses?
Yeah, I'm okay with increasing it to 2, but my concern is accessibility requirements. Have you looked into that? Because I think that there may be some additional accessibility requirements even for home offices.
Are we ADA accessibility?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, we can look into that. I'm not sure. They would be required to comply.
Right, there are requirements, and I don't have the dollar amount off the top of my head, but it's usually based on a dollar amount that someone's making improvements in the project, and you had to make a certain number of increases and enhancements of ADA accessibility based on the value of the construction work. So depending on what someone is doing, they may have to do some enhancements.
And it doesn't have to do with number of employees?
No, it's a dollar amount of the construction.
Okay, thank you.
So an existing home office that just wants to have an additional employee, that isn't going to necessitate any construction, so it wouldn't trigger ADA requirements. Okay. All right.
I'm supportive of what staff recommends to increase the number.
Okay. So it seems like there's at least a majority that is supportive of that. Now let's get to the live work, if we're prepared to have that conversation tonight. Yeah.
So I do have a question. On page 3 of 11 of this report, it says home occupations, and I'm sorry, that's on 2 of 11. On 3 of 11, it says home business ordinance requirements. It says operating standards. So this is the existing ordinance?
Yes.
And the standard for businesses within 300 feet of the same business in a commercial zone, is that to be maintained or removed, or we haven't, it's not a recommendation
We don't
about
address
it?
that in the staff recommendation.
Okay. I would just say that of all the complicated things, that in some ways stood out the most to me. I think there's sort of limited reason to say if you wanted to open an architect's office, if there was one around the corner, you couldn't have one. And we don't allow like cafes and whatever, massage therapy in home offices. So it just seems to me that I'm not sure what that 300 feet was
I
initially
don't know
about.
that it is a competing business, it's the same business.
I believe it's meaning the same business because many, many years ago, we had a case where someone had a business on Melrose, I think it was, and they ran cords across the alley to their house. And they
Right, and it
operated
was-
a business out of their house
This
as well.
is called micro-planning.
Yeah. I think, well, it was very controversial at the time.
Understood.
It was rock, paper, scissors. It was
Yes.
designed to prevent people from having a commercial business and then encroaching into the residential neighborhood by buying a single-family home and purportedly occupying it and
Okay.
then expanding their commercial business into a home occupation.
Boom. Yes. Then I'm 100% supportive if it's going to keep electrical cords from running across the alley. All right, and then I think what you're suggesting is right. The removing the requirement for retail on the ground floor and so on. The one question I had about all of this was that if there's a commercial, like a one-story commercial building that is, maybe on the east side, can that just suddenly become a residential building under this live-work ordinance? Someone can, turn their, their gas station into their house. Is that what this is saying? I mean, I know we have this sort of larger set of hopes for this, but is this really, like someone buys a commercial building and moves in and...
Well, this is saying it has to also have a work component. And so we
Right.
still have
Well,
to have a
it's
work
their
com-
business, but
so
they
it has
can
to have
move
their
in.
business. So we don't allow for standalone residential in our commercial zone. So you can't take an existing building and convert it into a dwelling unit without it also have some commercial aspect to it. So if they wanted to just convert it and not run a business out of it, then that would be a violation of our current ordinance.
But if they had a business there, can they move into it?
Yes.
And so that's what we're sort of saying, and then I guess it would be up to the landlord whether they would allow that to happen, or does the landlord have to allow that to happen?
They would still need to get a permit to make that take place, and so in theory, the landlords authorize people to apply for permits.
Okay, and one last question. This has nothing to do with our rent stabilization ordinance if the building was constructed before 1979?
Peter is here. Maybe he can answer that question. I'm not familiar with
I don't have the sense that we're going to have a big rush of people moving into their tire stores and their clothing shops and potato.
Yeah, we have rent stabilized units in the commercial areas, but these are buildings that have units that have been occupied since 1979. So if you're talking about a adaptive reuse of a building that was prior to 1979, I don't believe that would fall under the RSO.
No, we can talk about anything now. I think we resolved the first one.
Okay, thank you. I'm actually supportive of Alternative 3 in creating an overlay zone. I think that identifying key areas of the city where live work is particularly successful or could be particularly successful, or where the existing architecture supports live work, I think is helpful. I don't expect it to be a lot of places in the city, but I do know that there are certain key buildings that people talk about perhaps in their neighborhood that would be well suited by being supported by live work. And I think, as was outlined in the report, there are certain contributing factors to why live work has been a challenge in the past. In the report, however, it didn't identify parking requirements, yet that problem was solved in the recommendations. So I do think parking has been a large contributing factor. And in fact, I have spoken with property owners who considered live work who chose not to do it because of the parking requirements. So I'm glad to see item 2B there. I would like to see us, if any of my colleagues are interested, take a look at what potential areas of our community could be particularly inclined to live work as it's traditionally understood. I guess my question is, if we look at item 2A, if we eliminate the requirement for ground floor commercial retail sales, what then is the difference between a home business and live work?
Live work would be occurring in a commercial zone, and home businesses are permitted only in residential.
So they're the same
Oh,
thing.
and additional employees. No, live work is a
The restrictions on the types of businesses that are allowed are also much looser for live work versus home-based businesses. So number of employees and the types of businesses.
Okay, so I have concerns about eliminating the ground floor commercial retail sales. I think part of the reason we have live work in commercial zones is to activate the pedestrian experience. And in the example that you provided, it sort of shows exactly what then happens. It becomes not activated and sort of a dead spot in along a commercial area. I think live work in existing commercial buildings, throughout the Los Angeles area, that term sort of also became a marketing term, not just a specific zoning term or land use type, to identify buildings where people could live that were previously work only. But I think when we're talking about especially new development, there's nothing that really distinguishes, if we make this change, there's nothing that really distinguishes it from becoming simply a residential building, and unless you're intending to go in and make sure a business is operating out of those units, which I don't think is the intention. So I have concerns about item 2A. I also think I think this was mentioned in a previous council discussion, but if it's helpful, it looks like based on the map that you have, this might not be necessary, but if it's helpful to indicate on the business certificate, tax certificate application, if a business is in a residential zone to help address some of those potential issues, I just wanted to note that again. And perhaps not as part of this discussion, but I just want to put it on our radar to consider. The city has has started to understand how creating capacity for broadband access for the city is a long-term issue, and I know that people do look at, when they're looking at moving to West Hollywood, especially if they have work from home, what kind of broadband capacity is available, especially for people who work in the entertainment industry. So I would just want to throw out there at some point related to this discussion, especially for live work spaces, that we take a look at enhanced broadband accessibility and making sure infrastructure is available for broadband access to capacity to be increased, because I think that that's going to continue to be a challenge to support the number of businesses that will exist both in live work and in home office buildings.
Thank you. Councilmember Meister.
Thank you, Mayor. I think actually that A is fine, except that there should be something on the ground floor, so it doesn't necessarily have to be retail sales. But for example, in your example, your architect example, that frontage, it's someplace that it's accessible to the pedestrian to come in and say, hey, I want you to work on my house. Whatever it is, whatever their business is, whether it be art or architecture or a dentist even, that it be accessible from the street, and that's what really makes it the work live. Now, I do actually have some questions. Is live work, it's going to be 50% or more residential, correct?
The workspace would be dedicated as 30 to 50%. So the residential would be either 50 or 70%.
The work or the live? Sorry.
The live space would be a range of 50 to 70%.
Okay.
And the workspace would be 50 to 30%.
Okay, I think we have to have really clear definitions, so that we don't mix up, home business versus live work versus work live. Because if someone has a space where the commercial aspect of it is more than 50%, they should still be required to be going by the commercial requirements of the zone in terms of parking, in terms of other. So I think we have to be very clear about what each one is and what it isn't. I think that, again, 2A, as long as the ground floor has some kind of, you know, pedestrian access and it's a commercial, that's the commercial space, regardless of what kind of business it is, that it's something that will, you know, be accessible to pedestrians. Reducing the parking requirements, again, as long as it's that, you know, 51% or whatever you come up with, 50 or 51% live, then that would be fine. I think that to put the inclusionary requirements on this, I think it should really be based on if that's some kind of big project. I'm hoping that this is an opportunity for businesses, for people to open a business, that they won't be the big mixed-use developer, that this will be, you know, the more of the mom and pop, you know, we have this store here, we're living there, and so to look at it more like single-family homes or townhomes where people can actually have something, you know, that's their business and their home. Because once we make it, you know, like a mixed-use development, it's going to be a mixed-use development. That's what it's going to be. Are there requirements on height for these type, for live work? Is there a state requirement, or there's no?
No.
Okay. Again, when you go, once you go back to studying this, I would again look at the building and safety requirements, because I think that there are some requirements of, you know, once you include residential, because you have residential requirements and you have commercial requirements and they're different. You may want to look at that before you know, when you're studying this. And regarding the areas, looking at the different residential areas that you're thinking about, like Fountain and et cetera, I think I would want to do some outreach first to make sure that people are open to this, people who live on those streets. And I just don't want anyone to be surprised, because you know what happens when everyone's surprised. They end up here when you come back with the item. So I just want to make sure that there is a lot of outreach if we do look at Tier 3. And again, I don't know that we, you know, should worry about the inclusionary requirements for smaller live-work projects if we look at them like townhomes, because I think once we start putting requirements, additional requirements, we're going to put the kibosh on this. And I think that this is something creative that we can be doing, that I think all of us want to see happen to activate the streets, but also we are increasing housing by doing this, and we're increasing workforce housing by doing this. And that's something we're lacking in a lot of our projects. So that's how I look at it.
So I guess I have a slightly, maybe a greatly different view of this. I want to thank you for putting all the time in, and I know this was direction by council, and we've had different directions over time, so trying to formulate some recommendations is challenging. As I look at this issue, I have to think about what is the big demand in the city. I don't hear a lot of people saying, oh God, I really need live work. I need to live where I work. What I hear a big demand for is housing, just housing in general. And I would rather us spend time incentivizing ordinary housing in the commercial areas rather than focusing so much time and energy and attention on live work spaces. I don't agree that this is going to be, quote, workforce housing. People who are going to have one of these spaces in a commercial property are going to be paying very high rents for the opportunity to have their law office or their architect's office on the ground floor on key commercial corridor in Santa Monica, on Santa Monica Boulevard. So this really isn't going to be workforce housing the small mom and pop who are starting a new business. I just don't see that happening given the commercial rents that are charged. Why has this been a big challenge? in part because our regulations are not really great. They don't take into account a lot of things. But part of the reason this has been a challenge is that there isn't a tremendous market demand. If there was a big market demand for this, believe me, property owners and developers would all be coming here begging us to create some new live-work standards so they could capitalize on this big market. I just don't see this being something that's really going to produce, and I think everyone is acknowledging, we're not going to have a rush of these people coming to create live-work spaces. If we are concerned that the commercial space be activated, what you're talking about in terms of live-work, architects, they don't have retail clients. They don't want people walking in off of the street. Most attorneys have their own practice. They don't want walk-in business. So it isn't really going to be activating the street in any way. So I do have water. It's just the throat is closing up, which I'm sure you're grateful for in a moment. So I would prefer, if we're going to do anything, that we just do something simple like changing some of the standards under our existing ordinance. The idea of creating a live-work zone seems to me to be, one, premature because we haven't asked people in those neighborhoods, and two, it seems to be kind of pushing all of this so-called creative live-work space to one area of the city. If it really is that desirable, it should be citywide. So I'm not supportive of where we're going with this. I'm even reluctant about adding an additional employee in the home businesses because, again, that's a little bit more commercial encroachment into our residential zone that I think we should try to avoid, but I'll go along with that. But the live-work stuff just seems like more attention spent on something that isn't going to get us anything. Yes, of course you can respond.
Yeah, no, I think that it could be something that is desirable, for example, in the CN zone. I don't know if you have ever been to the Dave Jones, he passed away, but that was a live-work space. He had the space below, and he had his unit above, and it's a great space. And I could see in the CN zones this being popular. So I'm still supportive, even though the mayor is not.
The rumor is that he also owned a house in the hills, but I won't go down that path. So, Lindsay. Oh, I'm looking. I see. Lindsay.
Thank you. I think the reason there would be an overlay zone would be created is because existing architecture would support it. So I don't think, I agree that I don't think there's an overwhelming rush to the counters for this, but I do think that it is a valuable type of housing and workplace that's why it's present in the code. And right now, anyone who would be interested in pursuing it is disincentivized based on how the code is currently written. I also think we see the closure of big box retail. We see an increase in virtual and virtual commuter type jobs where people work from home or start their business up out of their home. And so that is the way of the future, and creating more and more, developing more retail space. I think we're seeing in some of the retail space that's been created a difficulty to immediately lease because we're looking for that exact right tenant. And in the meantime, it doesn't benefit the neighborhood that it was designed to support. So I think what we're looking at is existing opportunities. There's a building, for example, in just north of Melrose. What is that? Rosewood? Is it Rosewood? Or that is in a residential neighborhood that's boarded up, that's a commercial type building. Sherborne. Thank you. That we're not doing anything to address the building that's there and giving it an opportunity to be reactivated and see something like that happen. And I agree, this isn't something that is going to be widespread throughout the city, but I think if we're taking a curated look at the city and looking at some of those unique opportunities, that's why I think we should study. I understand we're not going to implement an overlay zone tonight. We do have to work with neighborhoods if that's something that council would want to move forward with. But I think taking a look at what some of those unique opportunities are is something that's important to do, and perhaps gives opportunity for existing businesses to see a second life that doesn't include them having to be demolished. So if we're working with what the recommendations are before us tonight, I think looking at 2B and C would help increase, at least starting with those two, would help with to increase the flexibility of what people can do with live-work facilities. And I would obviously state that I'd like to see us at least have a conversation about an overlay zone. I'm clear that the mayor doesn't feel inclined in that direction, but maybe somebody else does.
Councilmember D'Amico.
Thank you. I am in support of all of the items 2A through D. I hear my colleague about eliminating the requirement for ground floor commercial retail sales, but I think, I mean, maybe I need to have somebody fact check me, but my sense is that there are far more uses beyond whether you sell some sort of product or you're an architect. I mean, there are, of course, gyms and service centers and office uses and personal services, and so I just think that if we got rid of that requirement for retail, exchanging, $5 for 2 bags of potato chips or something, that sort of opens up the whole set of possible uses. And I further want to say to the mayor that, at least as I read this, and perhaps you can get me back in my lane, but it seems to me that there's a sort of reduction in unit size, not overall, but in living area. If you're only living in 50% of the 750 square feet, you're really living in, maybe 400 square feet, and you have 350 square feet of your office, and so the cost of those two rents would be going into supporting this live workspace. There's a reduction in the parking requirements, so that makes developing the building much less expensive. It begins to get us moving us in the direction of inviting developers to produce, overall units that are the same size, but they're smaller because someone who might have an office in a different location would be able to. This becomes a more affordable way to be living. The affordability requirement, I would like to see us look at all the possible options. I do think requiring affordable units for small businesses or artists, or maybe this could work in with our artists in residence. I mean, I don't think they're going to be producing that many, but I think there's a lot more thinking around the affordability, capital A, as you mentioned. And then I think there are just more options generally for our commercial properties that are maybe a little oddball and don't necessarily work as a retail space or a commercial space, but someone could very easily and simply understand it as a live workspace. And so I think if we actually, blow this open by adopting these items, I do think that we will get sort of a thin but a fairly substantial layer of people who will find ways to make good use of our existing spaces, and also developers who will be able to sell to prospective renters and to prospective investors the fact that these cost less to produce, and that people will pay more to, or pay the same to live and have their business in the same location. So I sort of went all the way around the block to say what I said at the beginning, which is that I actually support items 2A through D, and I hope that there's some support for all of them as well, because I think it will begin to show up. And I would just say one more thing. This item that came before us in 3B, I mean, obviously it was a hotel and it was a historic building, but the kind of extraordinary amount of hoop jumping they had to do to take a building that was empty for 25 years, you know, perhaps if we had this live-work ordinance, somebody would be living there, you know, and running a restaurant out of the bottom of it, and that might have gotten us there that much faster. So I think, you know, I think we should move forward with these, and they may not be ideal. We're a fairly nimble city. We could certainly adjust in 2 years or 3 years if there were something that was really going awry.
And if I can just add to that, again, I'm supportive of all of those as well, and again, I think definitions has to be the number one thing, and checking with building and safety, but also, I don't think we should exclude the possibility of JDUs. I mean, that's a way of having some small affordable units that could be added to the back of a building. The JADUs, the junior ADUs. So, I mean, I just want to say that shouldn't be excluded from this item.
Our ordinance for junior accessory dwelling units was only in residential zones.
That's why I'm suggesting that maybe we can include it. Maybe it's something that can be included in a commercial zone.
I believe that JDUs had to be associated with a house in front.
Okay, so an ADU then?
Well, both of those were
Have to be?
associated with a house, and we're adding housing onto a site where there's housing.
Okay, well, maybe small unit.
Does anyone wish to make a motion?
I'll make a motion that we move items 1 and item 2, A, B, C, and D, and that the staff bring back a zoning ordinance change with all of the discussion we've had with respect to moving those 5 items along.
Will this be brought before the Planning Commission? Thank you.
I have a question about your motion. Regarding item 2A, so you're open to housing being on the ground floor and not activating the pedestrian experience?
Well, so that's a good question, and I think they're not. The Venn diagram shows them overlapping, because if the ground floor had a gym in the front of it, then that wouldn't be a retail space, but it would be an active use of.
I'm fine with that.
Yeah.
So, but by eliminating that, you're not guaranteeing that you're getting that. You're leaving it open to residential being on the ground floor. So that's what I'm trying to clarify.
Well, I think maybe I need to clarify it as well. What I read is that this says you can't have commercial, that ground floor commercial retail sales are not required, but a ground floor commercial business is required. It is a commercial use.
If I could just clarify, there is language already in the ordinance that states that there would be pedestrian-oriented frontage. So we could set a certain transparency level, say 30% or 50% of the windows in the front would be transparent, and that likely would encourage any living quarters to be off of the sort of ground floor plane.
Okay. As long as we're making sure that we've
It's my
addressed
intention,
that issue.
so maybe even more, it's my intention that a commercial use be on the ground floor.
Great, thank
And
you.
thank you. So
Then-
maybe that's
then I
what it
can-
needs
yeah.
to say.
Okay, good.
Thank you.
I want to clarify item 2D. I thought in your staff report, you were not recommending that the inclusionary ordinance be applied to these dwelling units, that these would not count towards dwelling units for purposes of calculating the percentage.
No, they currently do not apply. In the staff report, I was suggesting that if we transfer it to a residential use, then the affordable housing requirements would then apply to those units, to the live-work units.
So just to play devil's advocate again here, all the incentives in the world, you've just taken them all away. because anyone who's going to develop this is going to say, wait, I put in these live-work units, and those count as dwelling units for my percentage, and I have to put in 20% now of 24 units as opposed to 20% of 20 units. So I don't know that that's really the intention of the council here, because it seems like you're trying to give with one hand and you're essentially taking away with the other.
Right, that's what I was saying, that by doing that, you're actually, you're putting a kibosh on something that could be.
It could potentially also impact the size of the actual development. So units under, was it under 5 units, they don't require affordable.
They still have to pay the fee.
Right, commercial spaces over 10,000 square feet also have to pay the fee.
But they're not subject to the inclusionary ordinance. John?
So you could, I mean, I think the motion's already been made, or to include that as a requirement, but of course the motion could be amended to cut out, let's say, 10 or fewer units not applicable to the affordable housing requirements. So small live-work projects wouldn't have affordability requirements at all, if that's a possible option.
Councilmember D'Amico, would you amend your motion?
We might need
I guess
more
we
information.
don't. Yeah, we don't need to decide that tonight. I have to say, I'm actually thinking, we need to have affordable units in every project, and or at least we need to have a regulation that requires that some dollars be put into our affordable trust fund if they're building housing. And so, I think maybe you need to noodle on it, and when it goes to the Planning Commission, they can noodle on it, and then you can make a recommendation when it comes back to us about, you'll probably get some input from Ed Levin, who's probably typing already, and others in the community who will have a sense about how this can best work to get some of this in place.
So to clarify, that your motion is then A, B, and C are all as is, and D would be direction to staff to look further into the issue,
Yeah,
to
to
include affordability, how we can include affordability without it becoming a hindrance
Right.
to the development.
And it's going to go to the Planning Commission, and then eventually, potentially, back to us with more information.
Okay. Any further discussion? Are we ready for a vote? Yvonne, can we have a roll call? The motion carries. We'll move on to item 4B and 4C. We combined these together. And we do have 2 public speakers on this, so if it's okay, I'll go ahead and call the public speakers while staff is getting set. Kevin Burton is our first speaker, to be followed by Stephanie Harker. Thank you.
My comments will overlap with what the staff will have to say. We shall see. But I just wanted to comment, partly following on from this month's Public Safety Commission meeting in Plummer Park, where there was quite a large turnout and a lot of discussion about public safety and crime and homelessness on the east side, that Lieutenant Ramirez of the COPS team of the Sheriff's Department did point out increased law enforcement activity on the east side, and perhaps Captain Aloma will refer to that in the report. And I just wanted to say I'm very supportive of that, extra bike patrols, extra foot patrols, extra steps being taken to be visible on the east side. I think that's very important. Of course, that requires resources from the Sheriff's Department. I'm sure Council is supportive of providing those resources for that kind of enforcement. Also, with regard to the public safety report in the department, I just want to thank Councilmember D'Amico for bringing up the issue of emergency preparedness. And he spoke about federal funding being available for that. And of course, that is a very active topic of discussion in the state of California, given what's happened with the fires and mudslides in northern and southern California recently. Improvement is needed. But one of the programs that contributes to that is the Community Emergency Response Team program, or CERT program. A lot of CERT volunteers turned out to the fires in Southern California, both in LA, Ventura, Santa Barbara counties. And I'm hopeful that Public Safety Department will find a way to have training here in West Hollywood this year, either with the fire department or some other entity. Thank you.
Thank you. Stephanie Harker.
Stephanie Harker, City of West Hollywood. The staff report states that Captain Alomas will be making recommendations to the City Council during the 2018-2020 budget process to increase Sheriff's Department resources serving the City of West Hollywood. I would like to not only recommend the Sheriff's budget be increased, but to voice an urgent plea to you to put every spare penny into the Sheriff's budget to include expedited funding for the small command center on the east side, not for deputies to sit behind a desk, but to use as a home base for the hopefully continued increased foot patrol and bike patrols. I called block by block twice this past week to roust the transients out of Virginia Gillick's carport, and the two guys who had to pedal there like madmen from Havenhurst to try and get there as quickly as possible were out of breath when they got there. So I'd like to see increased numbers of the security ambassadors as well. The mere fact that you, Mayor Howman, stated earlier that there is crime on the west side should alert all of us for the need to invest in safety and enforcement. My other concerns regarding the report, which was quite comprehensive: how do we address the transient population who refuse services, those who do not want to leave the streets but are still out there and breaking many of our laws? And as far as traffic goes, the radar feedback signs on Fountain, which I walked towards on a walk to La Brea yesterday from Vista Street, I feel that they should be backed up with some ticket enforcement, because almost every car registered as speeding higher than the 35 miles. And tomorrow night, Melrose Action Network Community Group, there's a meeting at Poinsettia Park at 7:30 in the gymnasium. Paul Koretz's office, LAPD, and the sheriff's representatives will be there regarding the crime in that area, which of course overlaps from Romaine. One side of Romaine is LA, the other West Hollywood. I hope everyone will attend, or those who can, who are interested in safety. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, so now we have two items that we've combined together: the Smart City Public Safety Pilot Project, as well as our public safety update. Francisco, are you going to give us a report on the Smart City Public Safety Pilot Project, or would you prefer that we just ask questions?
If you would like to just ask questions, I'm ready for that.
Okay. Questions for Francisco?
I have one question, Mayor. If I'm reading your report correctly, it outlines a timeline on page 7. Does this mean that we can expect, with the RFP issued and then all the way to the pilot start date, that we will have functional security cameras up and active by July of this year?
Correct. Yeah, that's where we're hoping to have a vendor, 4 vendors selected, and have them under contract so that beginning July 1st, we can start with some of the installations and ready to go.
Great, thank you.
I guess my question, and maybe this is a little frustration too, why are we going with this 4 vendors? Why don't we just issue an RFP and hire somebody like we would do with anyone else, with any other kind of project?
So the idea is that we would maybe have a chance to pilot more than one technology, as opposed to just selecting one vendor. So we are thinking that there's probably multiple technologies out there that we want to test out before we implement something citywide.
But technology changes all the time. So we'll, after 4 months, then we'll have to go through another pilot project with 4 new vendors who will have 4 new forms of technology for us. At
Yeah.
some point, we just need to make a decision and get the cameras there.
Yeah, the idea is for us to be able to learn some lessons from this pilot program that we can then implement towards the selection of an actual vendor for a citywide program. So it's really just testing out the multiple different technologies and to give us just a little bit more insight, because we just don't have that much information about what technology is out there.
I guess one other question I had is, when you investigated other cities, you focused primarily, exclusively on the United States, but London has had cameras in its public places for a number of years. Why haven't we explored that?
Yeah, we did take a look at the London camera program. They have a much wider distribution and a network of cameras. There's a slightly different, I guess, framework for what they have. They actually have monitored cameras that are monitored 24/7, which is not a model that I think we were looking for the city. So that's why we did research it, we looked into it, but it wasn't a model that we thought was appropriate for the city.
But their camera equipment does video record everything that's taking place, right?
Correct. They record, but they do the actual live monitoring.
Right.
Of the actual footage itself. And there's also different standards for like technology that apply to European technology, hardware, that don't necessarily apply here in the States. So, yeah.
All right. Yeah.
For the private owners program, I mean, that's not something that we have to wait on, is it? I mean, because that's similar to the DC program that I think we talked about last year or the year before, that maybe some kind of rebate program like we have with the lights, and private property owners set up their cameras, and that way there's just more eyes on the street, whether they be residents or businesses.
Yeah, we're recommending 2 additional pilots for us to explore. One of them is a rebate program where we would actually provide rebates to both residential and commercial property owners. The second one is actually a video sharing agreement. This is the DC model, in which through an MOU, the commercial properties would actually allow us to tie into their video feed for special events or whenever there's an actual emergency. So there wouldn't be a need for the sheriffs to actually go and approach a commercial property owner. We could actually take the footage in those particular instances. So it's sort of a combination of, or we're going to explore 2 different projects that can, obviously there'll be some people who will take advantage of both, but.
Right, but I mean, for the residential, though, we're not looking at MOUs.
No, the residential, it's strictly voluntary. And we'll look at some sort of marketing campaign so that we can come up with some signage so that people know that this is a program, a community policing effort, which is something that can enhance our community policing efforts right now.
And the only other place I was thinking that it might be nice to have cameras is the dog parks, for both safety purposes, but also because people might enjoy watching that.
Yep.
So, so.
Great, thank you.
Okay, Kristen, are you going to lead the public safety presentation?
Yes. Good evening, Mayor and City Council members. I'm Kristen Cook, Public Safety Director for the City of West Hollywood. Tonight we have Captain Sergio Aloma, Assistant Fire Chief Anthony Williams, and hiding in the wings here is Jeff Abel, our co-compliance manager, as well as Corey Plank from our West Hollywood Homeless Initiative, and Lily Campbell from the Public Safety Department as well. Sheriff's deputies remain focused on preventing crime and addressing the impacts of homelessness. We did hear a lot from the community at our last Public Safety Commission meeting last week. Captain Aloma is going to highlight a few of the statistics from our report this evening, and also cover the increased law enforcement presence, in particular on the east side. At the March 5th City Council meeting, City Council members directed staff to analyze interactions with homeless persons in this past year to determine if any additional steps can be taken. After we evaluate the effectiveness of the recent deployment changes that the station has made, we'll be making recommendations during the regular budget process on any permanent changes if needed for July 1st. As you all are aware, we're anxiously awaiting the finalization of the contract with the Los Angeles County Department of Mental Health for the clinician that will be dedicated to West Hollywood. Although County Council has not released the contract, DMH has identified an individual who's interested in matching up with West Hollywood Sheriff Station. So we continue to try to move them along as quickly as we can. So I know we're a little tight on time this evening, so I'd like to turn it over to Assistant Fire Chief Anthony Williams, who will start us off this evening. He's going to give a very brief summary on the big fires and then subsequent slides we had at the end of this past year.
Good evening, Mayor, Council. Tonight, I just want to give you a quick brief on what occurred during the fire siege of December. From December 4th through December 21st, period of 17 days, the LA County Fire Department was active in firefights, not only in LA County, but throughout the state. Deployment of resources totaled over 500 individuals from the Los Angeles County Fire Department and over 75 fire engines. So what's significant about those numbers are at no time were any fire stations in LA County vacant. We were unprecedented that Fire Chief Osby called back to duty each and every member of the department. So the city of West Hollywood had one engine committed to various fires throughout the region. However, the personnel resources were upticked. Normally we run 19 people plus one battalion chief daily in the city. From the time period of December 4th through December 21st, we ran 23. Putting every seat that was available was filled with the body. And that was the fire chief's way of maintaining a high level of readiness in case something else occurred. My jurisdiction not only includes the city of West Hollywood, but the city of Malibu, and that was a large concern of that time with the other fires that were burning. But the point is, at no time were any of the cities, in particular the city of West Hollywood, were they left to, i.e., fend for themselves, or were they understaffed. In fact, the staffing was, again, upticked by 20%. And that's it. And the slides that we did see in Montecito and in the Santa Barbara area, we sent a number of resources as well. And we are currently in planning stages to see what's going to occur the next few days as we anticipate the largest storm of the season to dump a substantial amount of precipitation. So there are sandbags available at both of your local fire stations and sand available at the local lumber yard. Any questions?
Thank you for keeping us safe.
Thank you.
Good evening, Council and West Hollywood residents. Captain Sergio Loma, the West Hollywood Sheriff Station. As has been mentioned, we are aware of residents and business owner concerns regarding crime in general, crime in the East End, homelessness. As Council is aware, and some of the residents have noticed, we've changed some of our deployment tactics and strategies on the East End specifically, adding some foot patrols with existing resources, having deputies focus on the area of La Brea and Santa Monica and east towards Fairfax. With increased foot patrols, we are also working on a deployment strategy with our EPT and COPS team to add foot patrols with those deputies as well as bike patrols down in that area. The last 6 months of 2017, we saw some decreases in some areas, particularly with violent crimes. However, we also saw increases, significant increases with property crimes citywide. In addition, as it relates to our homeless population, as you know, we started homeless outreach programs using our host team and some of our county partners towards the latter part of the year, starting essentially in September, doing outreach. as well as enforcing local ordinances and laws related to quality of life issues throughout the city. We feel that it is having an impact, although it's, as it relates to homelessness, is a very complex issue and certainly not something that we're, from a law enforcement standpoint, going to be able to solve completely, obviously, for some time. So I'm certainly open to any questions you might have related to the report and our crime.
Questions for Captain Aloma?
Thank you. I was wondering if you could talk about the opioid deaths in the city. There have been several notifications that young people have died in our city in the last 6 months or year, and I wonder if you could talk us through that.
Sure. So specifically with opioids, or other illicit narcotics, it's kind of what we did is we looked at the last 6 months of 2017 and looked at calls for service related to deaths in the city. What we found, and the data is kind of hard to interpret, and the reason for that is that we found that we had 14 calls for service from July to December of 2017 related to deaths of unknown causes is the way it's categorized for us. So when a deputy responds to those type of calls, obviously they can't make a determination as how the death occurred unless obviously there's obvious signs at the scene that could assist us or the field deputy in making that determination. The cause of death is ultimately made by the coroner's office. So it's kind of hard based on the data that we have to tell conclusively what the cause of death was without following up with the coroner's office. And a lot of times what happens in overdose deaths, because it is not considered a crime, the coroner's office won't necessarily get back with us on those because there's no investigation per se, no criminal investigation. However, what we did is we looked at the 14 deaths by unknown causes last year, and we found that 4 of those we could say with certainty that they were related to overdoses related to narcotics use.
Okay, thank you. I had some communication with Kristen and your office about abandoned buildings and access and safety, and I told a member of the public that we would sort of discuss it publicly. I think there are several buildings, somewhere around 20 is the number that's come to mind, that are sort of boarded up in our community, accessed by homeless or other individuals for whatever reason. And then the public calls, and we just wanted to sort of, I wanted to hear sort of how that's approached, how we can tell the public that if they see someone in an abandoned building, it is proper to call, and then their call will result in some change that most likely they would think would mean the abandoned building would be emptied of the people and it would be resecured. And so maybe, I see Jeff is sitting there, maybe you can just talk us through that.
Sure. So vacant properties in the city have been problematic for our residents and for us for some time. So generally speaking, our COPS team has been taking the lead on those vacant properties. The deputies assigned to the COPS teams are very aware of where the vacant properties are located, and they do checks pretty much daily. Where we have in the past run into problems is even a deputy sheriff, if it's a call for service or even if it's a self-initiated activity where they go by and check on their own, it's equally as dangerous for them in some cases to enter those large vacant properties and search. So it really takes some planning, tactical planning with their fellow deputies to go into those vacant properties and do so safely. So that takes some resources, it takes some time. So in the case where a resident might call us, a single deputy may go out to investigate, but then has to make a determination whether or not he or she is going to enter that property. Certainly I wouldn't recommend even a deputy sheriff doing that by themselves. So they have to evaluate what the problem is and whether or not there's actually anyone in there, and then make a decision from that point forward. However, we will respond and we will certainly evaluate things there. We have encouraged many of our residents and business owners that own those vacant properties to apply for or fill out a letter of agency that gives us the legal authority to go on their property and make arrests for trespassing. And those letters of agencies are good for a year, and they're even online, so it's pretty easy to go through that process. One of the problems we were finding recently that I think we're starting to get a solution for is that some of these properties are fenced off and they're locked. So it's just as equally as dangerous for a deputy to scale a fence and possibly hurt themselves, and now we're out of the deputy sheriff, no longer on patrol because they're at home resting behind an injury or what have you. So what we've done with code enforcement, there's now some of the locks, or I think most of the locks on those buildings now have a code that the deputies have access to and have. And so it's easier for them now to access those vacant properties where they're locked up, where they couldn't before. So that was a challenge previously, which has been solved.
And so how does that information from a member of the public that calls the sheriff's department get to code compliance so that, and if the sheriff doesn't want to go in, and I am not, I completely understand. I'm afraid to go into a dark room in my house, so going into somebody else's abandoned property is, but how does that information get to code compliance so they can call the owner and get them to go secure their building?
So we work very closely with code. Both our dispatchers are well aware of code enforcement and how to get a hold of them, as well as our deputies in the field, and certainly our cops team works very, very closely with code enforcement in the city. So communication between us and code enforcement is very good, and so we, anytime we get that kind of information, it's forwarded to Jeff and his team.
So when a member of the public asks me, I should tell them to just continue to call the sheriff.
Absolutely.
And then the sheriffs will send someone out and transfer that information to code if and when they're finished investigating, and then code compliance will follow up and get the building resecured.
Absolutely. And, deputies have, during the past year and continue to do so, enter those properties when they can do so safely, and they have been making arrests when there are letter of agencies on file or someone who is willing to press charges for trespassing.
Okay. I'm sorry, I just have a couple more quick questions. There was someone who wanted to know, and for good reason, what our sort of Airbnb citation record is of the past 6 months, and I thought maybe you could just spend a couple of, a minute or two to telling us how that's been, understanding that the law has changed, and so it may be different going forward.
Good evening, council members. The last 6 months of last year, there was a total of 10 citations issued for short-term rentals. There was 49 cases open, and we sent warnings to each one of those. We just recently passed a new ordinance where we get to work with host compliance now. So I'm hoping that the enforcement, you'll see an uptick in enforcement and actual citations issued to violators.
Great. And the last question I have is, I understand that the murder that happened, the suspect was arrested and I guess is now in the criminal justice system. And is there any indication that that had anything to do with West Hollywood, with any businesses, with any residents, other than the fact that they were both homeless and in the city at the time?
Sure. So yes, on Tuesday, March 13th, I'm sorry, the suspect was arrested in downtown Los Angeles by members or deputies, detectives from our Major Crimes Bureau Fugitive Task Force, which was working closely with Homicide Bureau to locate that individual. He was taken into custody without incident, or I'm sorry, she is a transgender woman who is the suspect in that case. What we learned and what we can share at this point is that there was a possible dating relationship between the victim and the suspect. And what's already been reported, there was some sort of dispute between the two of them that night. It escalated, obviously, to where she stabbed him. But there was like I said, a long-standing relationship between the two of them. They were well known to our deputies, both of them. Both the victim and the suspect have been arrested numerous times over the last several years, both by deputies here in West Hollywood, members of the Los Angeles Police Department, both Hollywood and Wilshire Division. They both had long criminal histories. So that individual was, as I said, arrested on the 13th, and the DA has filed a murder charge.
Thank you. I guess I want to go back to one of the questions Councilmember D'Amico started with regarding drug and also include alcohol overdose. What are our paramedic calls for service around drug and alcohol overdose?
For overdose, we currently have 36 categories that we log in our emergency patient care record, our electronic records that we recently transitioned to after many years with paper. So these 36 categories were vetted by DHS and our medical director. So when we go out to scenes, we currently have categories that we can put these patients into, such as overdose. A large percentage of our calls come in as ambiguous person sick. And similar to what Captain Aloma alluded to, we don't follow up on the particular, the exact cause of the sickness. We treat what we see out at scene. As paramedics, we do not diagnose. We paint the picture for the base hospital and we transport and treat accordingly. We're also, unless there's crime scenes that we would be called to testify at, due to HIPAA violations and HIPAA rules and regulations, we won't search any further than that. Some of our calls that may be related to drug overdose or to alcohol abuse come in as cardiac arrest, difficulty breathing, EMS, seizures, but we don't categorize it that specifically that I think what you're asking for right now.
Okay, that moving forward, that data might be helpful for our new alcohol liaison officer to have a sense of what that information is, how you're dealing with it, and be able to communicate that information to the businesses that she's working with. So if your divisions can work together on that information to be able to make sure, especially our business nightlife community understands what that, what that picture looks like and what we're looking to address, I think that would be really helpful. What is taking so long with this Met team, Kristen?
If I knew, to be honest, it would hopefully be solved. So county DMH gave us an MOA, which we reviewed with our city attorney's office. We brought it to council in November. Paul signed it, as we would any contract, forwarded it back to LA County. It is still with them, and it is now March, mid-March. DMH staff, we've been hounding them really at this point, almost every other day, claims that county council is not happy with the language, which was confusing for us since the county wrote it. So we're going round and round with them right now. Our last effort on really this morning was to try to get an attorney from Mike's office, from our city attorney's office, to maybe call over to county council and just, if there's some issue with the language, maybe we could work it out so we could start. And that's where we're at.
Okay, I'm happy to help on that.
Thank you.
I just wanted to know what the issue was. I've been getting comments, complaints, concerns about driving safety and enforcement in different particular neighborhoods, which I've been sending to you. But I think just to state sort of for the record that we're seeing an increased number of driving safety issues, distracted driving, people blowing through stop signs, especially as arterials fill up in those rush hour times, people cutting through different neighborhoods. It makes, especially, today I sat outside for a half hour with someone outside Kings Road Park, and, watching what happens at that intersection, making sure that we are doing traffic-related enforcement is really key, especially as we're trying to increase pedestrian safety, that enforcement aspect. I think that issue was raised, speeding, all of those types of things. We can raise awareness, but we also need the related enforcement aspect. I think at our last meeting, we talked about activating the East Side office. I think that's in our current, upcoming budget proposal. So what's the timeline for that? What does that look like?
I'd have to defer to our deputy city manager on that. I know that Oscar has it, the renovation, they're in the timeline, but we'll likely discuss it with the city manager during our regular budget process in April to see. We do need to talk about, and we spoke a little bit about this at Public Safety Commission last week, the perception of safety versus pulling a deputy off the field and putting them behind a desk in a storefront. We need to weigh the value of that. We certainly are willing to try different models and see how that goes. But again, and I said this at the Public Safety Commission last week, I recommend taking that $250,000 and keeping it in the field as opposed to putting it behind the desk. So we're looking at, do we do a little bit of a deputy inside? Do we have maybe a private security guard or a sheriff's volunteer or some sort of model where there's a storefront with somebody who can start the ball rolling for you and answer some basic questions? We've been investigating other kiosks. The one at the Grove actually does not have an officer inside of it. LAPD struggled, and the captain could speak at this more at length than I can to actually staff it, because again, you're pulling somebody out of the field to put them in a little house. So we're supportive of something. We just don't know what that something looks like. And we'll work with Oscar and his folks to kind of determine, how quickly we can get into that, the building across from Plummer Park, if that's the right fit.
And the facility that we're looking at across from Plummer Park is more than just public safety. It'll be a smaller City Hall East annex that'll provide services on the east side. We will have space available for officers to come in if they need to use anything that is indoor in terms of facilities, and that would be made available as any other City Hall resource. And that is part of next year's budget, and Steve Campbell in Facilities is going to be doing, as part of the budget development, an RFP and kind of a study on what it's going to cost to renovate that building.
And do we have an estimated timeline?
The goal would be to start it next year, but as we saw with the Worley building, some of these rehabs cost more than building a new building and take longer. So we want to come back to council with some options. We do have some of our folks in City Hall who are in temporary facilities now who would eventually have their permanent offices on that east side building, and public safety would be one of those divisions and departments that would be there. But again, the timeline and the studies are just in process now, and we'll have further discussions during the next budget.
I did a ride-along with Deputy Martinez last week, and was glad to see that the mobile command center was back out at Plummer Park. I think that's helpful. But I think we are talking about these things, but what our residents are, imploring us is to take action. And so I think there needs to be a sense of urgency around coming up with that plan. I understand that we want to have active deputies out in the field doing the job, not sitting behind a desk, but sometimes that deterrent also helps lighten their workload as well. And so there, I get that it's a cost-benefit analysis, but a sheriff's volunteer there, being informed and being able to communicate is, at least a step in the right direction sooner than later. And on that note, I guess when we're talking about staffing issues, there was a comment about increasing public safety funding, but if we don't have available deputies, I understand that there's an issue with recruiting and people getting through the academy. And so even if we increase our budget, what is the likelihood that we actually have people that we can increase staff? I mean, I'm happy to allocate money, but I think what we're trying to do is turn that money into action. And so can you talk, if we give increased budget, will there be more deputies at our station? Will that actually amount to, more bodies in West Hollywood?
The short and vague answer is to a certain extent. So the captain has been talking to contract law, as have I. And so if we're adding them in pairs, 2s and 4s, that type of thing, if we ask for 40 deputies, it's not going to get staffed. But if we're talking single-digit deputies, the county's willing to work with us to meet our needs.
Okay. I think along those lines, one of the issues or a suggestion that was raised last week was potentially also increasing our code enforcement staff. And so I would ask that staff take a look at what that could look like for our budget going forward between, Airbnb issues that are already under your purview, and then code issues that then get transferred to the sheriff's department in your absence. I think that's something that we do have control over. That's much different than deputies. And so I would like to see us take a look at what increased code enforcement staffing could look like. So we have code addressing those issues and more people available to address them. And then specific to, we have had some high visibility, high alert violent crimes out, and I'm glad to hear that in the most recent incident, the murder suspect was arrested and brought into custody. How is the station addressing these issues in terms of patrols? I think there's a sense of urgency from the community about especially because there is high visibility of these issues. So I want to communicate that because we're hearing it a lot. I'm sure you are too, but just to sort of acknowledge that the violent crime rate, according to the report, doesn't seem that it's increasing, but in the public it feels that way. So what are we doing?
So you're correct. The report indicates that citywide we've seen a significant decrease in aggravated assaults. What's difficult is when you do have those high-profile assaults, such as the one at the 7-Eleven back in September during Labor Day weekend, and then the recent murder. Obviously, and for good reason, they draw a lot of attention. So despite what our data shows, that violent crimes citywide are down significantly, which is also important to note that surrounding areas aren't experiencing the same decreases in those type of crimes. So I think the message to our residents is that we are increasing patrols in certain areas, and we also are trying to balance the increase in property crimes. So we've seen a significant increase in vehicle burglaries, for example, in some of our residential areas. So we're trying to address that while at the same time being responsive to the perception that violent crime is up, when in reality the statistics don't, or the data doesn't really support that. But we know that when there is a high profile incident and it involves someone who is homeless, or there's the thought that it might be a random act, and that there's someone out there that is targeting residents or even visitors, that's not good for either public perception or for our city. So certainly when we have any violent crime that occurs, our detectives are very good at what they do, both here locally at the station. They're the ones that investigate those aggravated assaults, and they have a very high solve rate on their local crimes for ag assaults. And then, of course, in the case of the homicide, we have an outstanding relationship with Homicide Bureau. They are very responsive to us. In the case of the recent murder, for example, I was on the phone or emailing with the detectives and their lieutenant pretty much on a daily basis, and they were continuing to update me on information. However, there's also that balance when I receive information, whether or not it's appropriate to release it, because it may, in fact, compromise their investigation. Certainly when they're actively searching for someone who is trying to avoid arrest. So we have to balance those things. The community's right to know, and trying to provide timely and relevant information to those crimes versus our ability to investigate those crimes and let the detectives do their work.
Thank you. Yeah, obviously you heard that many people attended the Public Safety Commission meeting, and just because they're not here tonight doesn't mean their comments are forgotten. And so making sure that we're reflecting the sense of urgency around those high-profile crimes is very important. My last question has to do with the statistical rape increase that's noted in the report. What do we know something that's common among them? What are we doing to address that increase? I understand that given the number of people that come, we often hear, given the number of people that are here, our statistics are relatively low, but to see an increase, I'm wondering what have we learned and what else needs to happen to address this issue?
So increases in a specific type of crime or crime in general?
Rape.
Rape. Oh, I'm sorry. So, just a moment. When we looked at the rapes, they were up the last 6 months significantly. Now, when we did a breakdown of the 15 that were reported the last 6 months of last year, 3 of them actually did not occur in West Hollywood. They were victims who are residents of West Hollywood that reported it to our station, and we took what's referred to as a courtesy report for another agency, and it was categorized as a West Hollywood rape when it should not have been. So then still 12 is 12 too many. We looked at those, and some of the trends that we noted were that 7 of the incidents started at some of our local bars or nightclubs, and alcohol was involved in all of them. So certainly the message that we want to give our residents and visitors, some of those, the 7 that I refer to, there was some sort of arrangement or relationship between the victim and the suspect. It wasn't random, although we also saw that as well with the rideshare suspect who was doing this in other jurisdictions as well. So absent that particular one, though, some of the others, the common trend we found with the nightclubs and bars was, again, alcohol was involved to some extent. There were relationships between victim and suspect, and later on, these rapes were reported after they agreed to go to another location, either a residence or another place outside or within the city.
Well, I know the city has our Know Before You Go campaign and related public safety efforts, but I think this is also something that our alcohol liaison officer should be taking into account to have those tough conversations with the business community to say, we all have a shared responsibility in addressing this issue and making sure that people are enjoying themselves safely and responsibly, because that's a concern. If that's the common thread, that's a concern.
Councilmember Meister.
Thank you, Mayor. I just have a couple of questions. Although I know that the vehicle burglary numbers went up, I'm actually a little more concerned about the armed robbery and the strong arm robbery crimes that are happening in Center City and the East Side, which have also gone up. The numbers have gone up significantly. And I just wondered if there are any patterns that we should know about in terms of time of day, or, and how successful have we been in solving these crimes?
So a lot of our robberies throughout the city, not just in Center City or even the East Side, are street robberies. So those are crimes of opportunity. Many times they occur late at night when people are either walking alone or walking in areas that maybe are not well lit, in residential areas. And again, they're crimes of opportunity. Someone sees a cell phone, that's probably the number one most common item that's taken in these street robberies. So we don't see armed robberies of businesses. I mean, we do see them, but not the way we see the street robberies. That is probably the one area, the trend that we see most commonly.
So maybe, Kristen, we need to up our public safety message on the street safety. And then regarding the McDonald's, I had asked Kristen and Jeff if, if the numbers are high in that area because they're open all night, if that's an issue.
And Councilmember, we did look at those. Captain Aloma is scrolling. Our next step is to have code compliance meet with the business and also have a sheriff representative present, whether it's Captain Aloma or Lieutenant Ramirez. But I'll turn it over to the captain on their statistics.
So what we did in response to your question regarding that business specifically was look at our calls for service versus reports of crimes that were taken by deputies there last year for the entire year. So what we found was that there were 45 police reports taken there for the entire year using that address. When we did a breakdown of the 45 reports or crime reports, they pretty much ran the gamut. There was, for example, vehicle code violations where someone was perhaps cited for driving without a license or unlicensed driver, and that address was used. So once we started to kind of break it down even further for crimes that were actually committed inside the business or on the property, we found that we had 4 non-aggravated assaults, so batteries that occurred there. Of those 4, 1 was a domestic violence, and the other 3 were, like I said, batteries. There was petty theft, shoplifting was noted, forgery, possession of controlled substances, not including marijuana, a variety of different misdemeanors mostly. We didn't find any. There was a felony vandalism. There was 4 different vandalisms reported there, 1 being a felony. So those were the type of crimes that we noted there.
So I guess my question is, would you consider that an issue then? I mean, you're going to speak with them. I assume that this more than most businesses?
Well, that's a great question. We didn't. What I'd like to do is kind of look at it a little further, because as we started to look at the data related to that business specifically, I think it would have been, we should have looked at other businesses in the area.
Context.
Correct. And some of the businesses in the area have uniformed security folks that we know of. And so I want to kind of see and compare if having uniformed security at the other businesses, if there's a significant difference in the number of calls for service and the reports related to this business and other businesses in the area, to kind of, again, as you said, give it some context.
Because this business doesn't have uniform security or any security, right?
They do not. Block by Block does frequent checks there. Our deputies on foot patrol do checks there, and that was something else that we looked at, was self-initiated activities by our deputies last year for the entire year, and there was probably over 200 patrol checks by deputies alone at that business.
Yeah, so I think we have to look at our resources and how our resources are being used, and at what point do we say you need to have your own security guard because you're utilizing people who could be in our neighborhoods patrolling? Jeff, did you want to say something?
Yes, if I may add, there's we amended the extended hours code about 4 months ago, where it requires upon renewal that they have a security guard for extended hours, which is from 2 a.m. to 6 a.m. I believe their license comes up for renewal in September. At that point, we will require that they have a security guard after 2 a.m. until 6 a.m.
Okay, great, thank you. And my other concern is Fountain Avenue. You know, we get reports, what is it, like at least once a week, if not 2 or 3 times a week, there are accidents happening. Until we make those modifications on Fountain, are we patrolling? Are we, I mean, do we have traffic police there that are, the motorcycle guys? Are they there waiting for these people who are speeding? Have we increased our tickets there?
Yes, and yes. We are increasing patrols there with our traffic enforcement deputies. We also have our two motor deputies who have focused on Fountain. What we also did just very recently, within the last few weeks, our traffic services detail, which is a headquarters division for our department, not assigned to West Hollywood. They do periodic enforcement operations throughout the county of Los Angeles at all 23 sheriff stations. So they come out to West Hollywood, and quite honestly, I couldn't tell you what their schedule is. So that was a problem for me. I reached out to them and I spoke to their captain. They operate on a grant that they manage, and then they send their resources out to the various stations. The problem that I saw with their deployment model was that they don't have the resources or the time to check in with the local station to find out what the local issues are. So what I asked was that the grant be brought over to West Hollywood Station for us to control and for us to manage. So we met with them just a couple, 3 weeks ago so that we can start managing that grant and use our own resources with the traffic grant, so we can focus on areas that we know are problematic and have our deputies do it, rather than have deputies from outside units coming in that don't know the area and aren't familiar with the concerns of our residents and in our community. So that's going to be happening here very shortly.
That's good. And just two quick comments. Just, the decoy cars are great, except that when they're there for longer than a couple of days, people realize that no one's there. So if we're going to put decoy cars out on the east side, for example, or even on Fountain, I think we need to be moving them around every 1 or 2 days, because people do wise up and they know what they are. And then the other thing is, I just want to remind people that tomorrow night at Poinsettia Park, 7:30, Melrose Action Network, LAPD, and sheriffs will be there for a meeting. Thank you.
Thank you. And will we be represented at that meeting?
Yes.
Great.
Absolutely.
So I have just a couple of final comments. One, this is for Jeff. There are some properties on Fairfax that are boarded up that have been approved for development. I know that there's been homeless issues there. They are secured at this time. When are they going to be demolished?
Good question. We've heard from the developer that it's going to be demolished over the last 2 months, and it hasn't been demolished yet. They have their permits. We've required that they have a 24-hour security guard to make sure that there's no transition on the building is secure. I could look into that tomorrow and get back to you, but they've had the permits for like 2 months.
I know that this is a bigger issue and it's a citywide issue, and we've had some conversation about it before, but I'd like us to have this item brought back to us, the idea of buildings getting a demolition permit. We, for many years, didn't allow a demolition permit until they had their building permits ready to go. There's a reason for that. Sometimes the development doesn't actually take place, but we might want to relook at that and make it easier to demolish buildings that already have an approved development plan, and so that we don't have buildings, or at least have the discretion on the city level to decide to incentivize these buildings to be removed quicker than later. Kristen, the issue of Department of Mental Health and County Council and this frustration, I'm now as frustrated as you are. First of all, the county should be providing these services countywide to begin with, without us having to contract with them to do it. They're not providing the services, so we decided, okay, we'll contract with you to have a dedicated person in West Hollywood. They are dragging their feet and not getting it done. Why don't we just scrap the contract with the county and contract with our own professional to do this? Is that an option for us?
We've talked about that at the staff level, to be honest. I'm not sure if it's an option. We haven't gone farther than just one of my team having the idea, to be honest. But we certainly plan on investigating that if they don't come to some sort of resolution at some point soon.
And they haven't even signed the contract. Imagine the problems we're going to have in terms of getting them to perform under the contract. If this is how excited they are about contracting with us, maybe we should just say to them, fine, we'll find somebody to do this job for us. We can contract with a mental health professional who has all of the skills without all of the bureaucracy. So can you at least look at that and
Absolutely.
bring it back to us?
Absolutely.
I guess my comment about Fountain is that we do get the reports of the accidents, and I live right at the intersection of Fountain and La Cienega, so I sometimes hear the accidents as well. But I'm not sure we get reports about accidents that occur on other of our other main streets. So I think sometimes we may be getting a skewed perspective. I know that there are similar accidents on Santa Monica and Sunset, et cetera. So I'm afraid that I'm not saying we should not address the problems on Fountain, because believe me, I know the problems on Fountain. But I'm afraid that we're saying all the resources need to be dedicated there, where there are other streets that have similar, if not more serious impacts, San Vicente being one. So can we get some information from you about where the accidents are occurring citywide, so we, as we're thinking about dedicating resources, we at least have that perspective?
Yes, and I know some of the reports that we give you have an informal feel to them, whether it's an injury crash on Melrose or Fountain or whatever, but we can definitely build into our formal reports to you all. Maybe we'll figure out what the appropriate threshold is, because we tend to have a lot of fender benders as well with, minor damage, no injuries. So we'll add that to our formal report, and we can even have the Public Safety Commission take a look at it for a few months as well, maybe kind of work out the kinks. But yes, absolutely, we have issues citywide. And just today, I got 3 requests for traffic enforcement regarding running stop signs, speeding in 3 different locations, and that's probably a normal day for me. So the issues that we're discussing, certainly you can pick up more speed on a Fountain or a Santa Monica Boulevard, but the residential streets are feeling the impact of either poor driving or traffic, or people not obeying the traffic signs.
And some of it has to do with the volume of traffic on certain streets. So
That's
if
correct.
we can get that kind of information going forward, I think it'd be useful. And I think the final thing I want to say, and Stephanie Harker and I don't always agree, but I definitely agree here. And I think that what I'm seeing and what is frustrating for me, and I think frustrating for a lot of our residents, is that we do have a group of homeless, quote, transient individuals in the city who are really not interested in services. They are perfectly content drinking all day, hanging out at the park, hanging out at the Sal Guariello fountain. I see some of them, how they manage to buy marijuana or get marijuana. They're doing that. They're smoking marijuana. And we can provide all the outreach and services in the world. They're not going to change. They're not going to do anything. And I think there is a linkage to that group of people in the city and some of the property crime we're seeing. And I think what I'm hearing from the public is, even though our residents are very generous and very compassionate, and I think as a city, we are as well. But people do not want to put up with this kind of behavior anymore. And I think that whether that's through the sheriffs, through our homeless outreach, that message has to be communicated, and we have to be pretty resolute in saying, you want help, you want services, we'll do whatever we can. But if all you want to do is hang out and be bad apples, well, we don't want you here. And we're not going to tolerate the kind of behavior that's been reported, not just on the east side, but the west side and throughout the city. So how do we kind of shift our focus and really start communicating that message?
So just today, one of the captain's lieutenants and I met with a resident with exactly what you just described, not an east side resident, more in the center of the city. And while she expressed compassion for the situation as well, again, we've described to her, we're taking a letter of the law approach on the sheriff's side, on the municipal code side, as best we can. And the captain can go into a little more details on if they're able to book inside the station as opposed to citing in the field, they're choosing to book inside the station. So again, anything that we can do to maximize the penalty, so to speak, for the criminal offense that the sheriff can either arrest for or cite for, we're definitely doing. I think the increased presence that the captain has added over the last couple months, you know, we need to see how that feels for a little bit and make our permanent recommendations to you all. That's helps with perception, it helps with preventing crime in the first place. So we'll continue kind of both sides, like really strict enforcement, and then also increasing that public safety presence across the board.
Great, thank you. Further comments? There's a motion to receive and file the recommendation and the report. Do we need any further action?
I was going to ask if well, I think we have two items. I don't know if we have to take them separately, but on item 4C, if we could add a third recommendation to direct staff to include a staff increase in whatever the related budget cost is for code enforcement.
So to investigate that. Okay, so I don't have any problem with it. I'm not sure that I would necessarily support it, but the direction is to ask the city manager to develop that report and recommendations. Okay? All right, and so that will be included in 4C. I don't know that we need to take any formal action. This was just really the 6-month report.
Exactly.
Mayor?
We do have, sorry.
I'm not done. So I do think we need to take some action on 4B. Okay, Yvonne.
There is action to be taken on 4C. It's a resolution adding an appendix to the East Side Communities Plan.
Oh, okay. Sorry. There is an action on that.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for catching that. So is that your motion?
Staff's recommendation plus directing staff to come back with a report on increased code enforcement.
Okay, so that's a motion. Second? Yes, you can.
Okay, I meant to ask when I was speaking, some of the higher, this might take a second, I'm sorry, some of the higher profile cases of the last year, do we have any updates on them? I'm thinking of the case that started this discussion about cameras at San Vicente, and the case of the young man who died of an overdose in an apartment of a resident. Are there any updates on either of those?
I'm sorry, the one on San Vicente, the
Yeah.
cameras?
I'm sorry? Yes. Yes. Kurt Doffing. Sorry,
I think that
terrible
was
with
before
names.
Sergio took over.
I don't even know all of their names.
I recall, I think that was Memorial Day 2015. There isn't any new updates on that case, unfortunately. Our detectives worked that case pretty tirelessly, looking for any evidence, leads, witnesses
And Mr. Dolphin has no further recollection?
No. In fact, our detective was visiting him both at the hospital and later at a rehabilitation center, meeting with his sister on a regular basis. And he did that for months and months, hoping that he would have some sort of breakthrough and be able to recollect anything that might help, but that never happened.
And Mr. Buck's case?
That particular case, I spoke to Captain Bergner of the Homicide Bureau just last week. They are somewhat frustrated in that they are trying to, they have individuals that have suggested they have information. What that information is, they don't know because they're not, they've been reluctant to come forward and meet with the detectives. There was a request for immunity, which was granted by the district attorney's office. However, those immunity agreements are only good for a month, and then the detectives have to go back to the DA to get those to get them updated. So that's where they're at. So they're at a point where they want to present the case to the district attorney's office. That's their ultimate goal, to let the district attorney look at whatever evidence they've been able to come up with and make a determination as to whether or not a crime was committed. However, they don't want to do that without exhausting every possible lead and talking to every possible witness. So that's where that case is at.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor.
Can we complete the voting on 5C? That's been approved with the additional direction. And then 4B, we need to figure out what we're going to do with 4B. Anyone want to make a motion with respect to 4B?
Happy to approve staff's recommendation.
Okay.
And I am seconding that, but I just want to say that there's one sentence in here that is, maybe Francisco can address it, but it doesn't actually say that they're going to put cameras at each one of these locations. It says cameras and sensors for privacy metrics, and I think at least in the intersections that are identified, I think it's the council's wish that these be cameras. And so I think it can be cameras and sensors, but I don't think it should be cameras or sensors. I don't think we just want to count bodies crossing the street or number of blonde-haired individuals or something. I mean, here it would be 3 and 3. So I just think, you know, in my mind, this is about eyes or virtual, digital eyes on the street. And so I think that's our direction. And
Agreed.
And
it looks like Francisco's nodding, so I'm happy to add that clarification to the motion.
Thank you.
I'm just going to make one last comment, and that is that I remain frustrated about the way this has moved forward. We had approved cameras at certain locations in 2015. This then got segued into the Smart City project, and now here we are in 2018, and we still don't have cameras, and we're not going to get them. We're going to get a pilot project with 4 different providers who we're going to evaluate, and I would like us to stop studying and just do it. So that's my frustration. But it seems like there is support to move forward with this as at least as a step forward of some sort.
So, Mayor, here's my concern. We'll say choose one, and then that will cause more studying of how to choose one. I don't know. I mean, maybe we can ask the city manager, Francisco, to address it directly, but I couldn't agree more. I mean, we put it out to RFP, choose a camera, put up 4 cameras. If they don't work, we'll know they're not working right. But I also, I don't want to put a new process in place. Right. I'd rather that we just had them go with this one. So I don't know, city manager, maybe you can give us some feedback.
We're coming up with what we believe is the smartest approach to create tools and resources that provide the community and the council with the most flexibility and the most value for the money. There are just standard cameras we can put up, and the standard cameras provide some resources. They also create huge liability and logistical issues in terms of the maintenance and the data collection from those cameras. We're looking at putting up multiple cameras throughout the city, which, you know, multiplies the problem. You're hearing a lot of the issues that the sheriff department and other agencies are having with the cameras that they're putting on public safety officers. It's a complicated issue. What we're looking at now is, again, a model that provides us flexibility. We can explore and find the best technology, and once we have that in place, we can roll it out very quickly. So this is our best recommendation at this time.
I share the mayor's frustration, and I think this is the first time we've had a hard and fast date. I heard July 1, 2018, so there better be some cameras up by July 1st, or I think this council's going to be very angry.
Okay, so there's a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Let's go ahead and vote. That was a big sigh you heard. I thought my mic was off. All right, so that completes all the items on our agenda tonight. Any additional comments? Any additional council member comments? We then stand adjourned.